If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
Skeptics, what was the one paranormal, demonic, or supernatural encounter that made you a believer?
A couple of years ago, I had to get my cat to the vet to euthanize her. She had cancer spread all over. She was 13, and she had been with me for almost half my life. Nearly every night, she slept in my bed. Anyway, I and she were big friends. I could touch her paws, turn her on her back, etc. My parents and brother could only pet her head since that was the only thing she allowed them to do. Strangers were a big no-no to her. The weeks after her death, I would wake up every night at 1:15 a.m. sharp, not a minute earlier, not a minute later. I'd see her walk over my desk and feel her walk over my legs. In the beginning, I was even scared to turn on the light. When I started opening the light, nothing was there. After a while, it gradually stopped. I still miss her. Twice in my life I've seen what looked like animal skeletons in skin-tight latex or something running by. The first time I saw it running across a field. It looked like what you'd imagine a wolf-like skeleton with a vacuum-sealed latex skin over it, basically the most extreme possible definition of skin and bones. Then years later I saw a skin and bones, deer-like creature dart across the road while driving. These were way too skinny to be living animals, and I brushed off the first sighting as a kid to my imagination until it happened again as an adult with a different-looking animal. These were both solid black and too skinny to be real animals, misidentified. Years ago, I was sleeping with my fiancé at his mother's house. I woke up in the middle of the night with the weirdest feeling that someone was watching me. I scanned the room and noticed someone standing at the foot of the bed, on my fiancé's side. The figure was pitch black and featureless. I'm terrified, and I think, oh, I must be dreaming. Then I look over at my fiancé, and he's staring at it too. It was the most horrifying moment ever. Suddenly, the fiancé sits up really quickly and aggressively. In that moment, the thing disappeared. Afterward, I wanted to dig a hole in the mattress and sleep underneath him. I found out later that pretty much everyone in his family has seen this thing, and they call it the shadow. It still makes my skin crawl thinking about it. That night was the most frightened I have ever been in my life. When it made itself known. It was 2018, and we've lived in this house for quite a while. I was always skeptical of the house. I felt like there was something else there. Now, of course, there would be a few occurrences where I thought there was some paranormal activity. But it was very minor and could easily have been debunked as something else that's more reasonable. This house had 2 stories, and on the second floor, you could easily hear when someone was walking due to it being, well, the second floor. Of course, my room was on the second floor. But there was one night that I've never forgotten. This night confirmed that I was not just paranoid. It was very late at night. I can't recall what time, but it was definitely past 2:30 a.m. I was turned, facing toward the wall while half asleep, when all of a sudden I felt something run across my floor, up onto the corner of my mattress, and back onto the floor, into my closet. I turned around only to see that my clothing hangers in my closet were swaying as if something had brushed up against them. Keep in mind that my closet wasn't very, how do I say, deep? There was no way you could hide in it. When I heard it running, it felt like it had 4 legs. I did, however, have a dog. The weight that I felt when it came up onto my bed felt as if it was a mid-sized dog, but my dog was downstairs in his kennel. A few nights after that, I woke up to my door slamming shut. Is it a poltergeist? If anyone has answers, I'm all ears. Years later, and I still think about it. I never saw what it looked like, I never knew what it was. I no longer live in that house. I'm a skeptic of basically everything. But my mom actually has a story about me as a kid she always tells that scares the hell out of people. When I was 3, her aunt, who she was very close to, Ida, died. A few months later her friends took her to a psychic as a birthday gag. The psychic told her not to worry about herself or me because a woman who was like a mother to her and who had died was watching over us both. It freaked her out, but she ignored it. A few months later she was walking to bed past my bedroom door, which was open a little. She heard talking, and she looked in. I was sitting at the end of my bed, staring at the wall, having a conversation in the dark. She turned the light on and shook me and asked me what I was doing and who I was talking to. I told her that I had just been at Ida's house and we were eating cheesecake and playing Hi-Ho Cherry O, both my mom's favorite. I've never been to Ida's house, and I was 3 and didn't know what those things were. And we lived across the street from a giant cemetery. And that's where Ida was buried. I am a professor who teaches Photoshop and other digital graphics. I bought a house from the estate of a photography professor who had died 4 years earlier, but I had never met him. When we bought the house, we were cleaning out the junk in a tag sale, and a woman walked in and said, "I'm a seer, there is an old woman who haunts this house, and she is so happy children will finally be coming here soon." The dead guy I bought it from never had kids, but he had a mom who lived in the house her whole life. I got my wife pregnant within days of moving into the house. The more ducked up thing is that the dead professor who I bought it from had a brother. The brother sent us a letter after buying the house, but by the time we received it, he was dead too. He had a heart attack, but his wife had Alzheimer's, so he tried to drive himself to the hospital and killed both of them. The other crazy thing is that the dead professor I bought it from would buy the things I needed for repairs but not do them. So I realized when things needed fixing, I would just look around the house. The tools and supplies would often just be lying there. Then in the most ducked up thing, my kids had a book called A Ghost Called Fred, and they'd leave it lying around. The guy's name was Fred. I am a complete skeptic, 100% not superstitious or religious. My friend told me she had been having really bad nightmares and couldn't sleep and asked me to stay the night. I did, but I never fell asleep for more than a minute or so at a time. Something woke me up, and as I opened my eyes, I saw a completely black creature the size and approximate shape of a mountain lion silently crawl out of the closet and to the end of the bed. It then reached its paw up onto the bed, almost as if feeling for whoever was on it. I definitely didn't sleep that night. The next day, I convinced myself that I was half asleep and dreaming, which I have been known to do, even with my eyes open. I jokingly asked my friend if her nightmare was about a pitch-black demon cat. The blood drained from her face, and she got wide-eyed and started shaking. She told me that was exactly what it was and that it wasn't a nightmare. It would come right before she fell asleep and lay on the bed, snarling whenever she moved. She had never described it to me before that day. My husband and I were out on a long trip with our motorbike. It took much longer than we had planned for, and my diabetic husband got too low blood sugar. It was cold and in the middle of the night, so we took a break in a small village on a wooden bridge. We had nothing left to eat, and I was afraid he would die. It was 90 kilometers to our home, and there was mostly forest and water around us. So to lighten up the dire situation, I took up our digital camera and snapped a couple of photos of him as he was leaning over the edge of the bridge. In the display of the camera I saw like a white spear thrown in front of him, so I asked him to come closer. And then the white streak became several white streams that flew around him, just like in the end of the first Indiana Jones movie, when they opened the coffin. It was only visible on the display. When I looked up, there was nothing. But it did show up in the photos. Have never been able to explain it. A few paranormal things have happened to me throughout my life, but the one that's talked about in the family still is when I saw this little boy as a kid. When I was really little, like 4, 5, or 6 or something, we were visiting my grandparents for a huge family/friend dinner thing. I was the only kid there. My grandparents had this walk-in pantry in their apartment with a window. I kept getting shooed out of the kitchen by my grandmother, so I decided to stay in the pantry and try to look out the window. I liked leaning out of it so I could see more. In the complex of apartments my grandparents stayed in, there was a sandbox for the kids to play in the corner of one of the apartments, on our side of the complex. While I was leaning out of the window, I saw this kid playing in the sandbox with a wooden truck. My grandpa did woodworking in his free time and would make toys with what he had left for the kids. Apparently, I kept staring at this kid enough that my mom asked me what I was doing, and I pointed at the kid and said I wanted to play with him. According to my mom, I got everyone's attention by saying that. She asked a few more questions, which I answered, like, she can't see him from where she's standing. What does he look like? And stuff like that, and she sent me to the living room. She came back later and told me I could play with him tomorrow because it was dinner, and I agreed. Never saw the kid again. Years later, my mom tells me I was the deceased child of one of the family friends during that dinner who died in a car accident a few years before I was born. Added, I had never seen this kid in my life or any photos and had just explained what he was wearing. My toddler is freaking me out. A few nights ago my toddler woke up in the middle of the night screaming for me. She was terrified. I ran to her room and lay down next to her bed, and she calmed down and went back to sleep. I chalked it up to a nightmare that night. But every day since then, when we go in her room, she references an octopus. Oh no. Octopus. I get out. Then she runs out. It's some variation of exclaiming there's an octopus and wanting to leave. She's never had an octopus toy or anything, and it's kind of giving me the creeps. I don't like being in her room anymore either. Any theories or advice? We are not religious, and I'm a bit of a skeptic, but I do think kids can sense things that adults are more numb to. Update, she woke up at 5 a.m. screaming, so I went and got her and brought her to my bed. She pointed at my closet and said, "Uh-oh. Octopus." I told her to go night-night, and she did not go back to sleep. Later in the morning I asked her to show me where the octopus is, and she pointed to the kitchen. So we went to the kitchen, and then she pointed at the back door and said, "Outside." Then she threw a tantrum because she wanted to go play outside, and I said no. So I don't know. I was hiking in Yosemite, and one night while stargazing, I saw a light that slowly moved across the sky in a reasonably straight line. I thought it was a satellite, as those are incredibly common when you get out into places that show the night sky clearly. The light then stopped and started moving in every direction in these erratic jumps and bursts of speed. It did this for maybe 20 minutes before it started moving in its original direction. I have never seen anything like it before or since. Shooting stars or satellites don't just stop and zip around in random directions like that. It couldn't have been a drone because it seemed to be too high, and you couldn't hear anything, and besides, most drones can't move like that anyway. Everyone in our group saw it, but we didn't really talk about it much, other than my buddy referring to it as the drunk driving alien. I don't know what it was, but I have seen nothing like it before or since. He didn't know he was missing. My friend went missing 4 years ago, suddenly and unexpectedly. His name will be G, for this, obviously not his real name. We're high schoolers in Texas, my entire friend group is super close, and we spend hours with one another, so one going missing is strange. G wasn't a loner, like many missing people have been. He's always been over ecstatic, excited, and he's extremely smart. 2018 rolls around, and it's nearing our semester exams for our 6 weeks. I have third period with G, that's our only class together. He's not there. It's unexpected, but I thought he was sick. We all kind of assumed he was until his parents had messaged me. All my friends have our parents' numbers shared with one another in case of emergency. A few of us, including me, have medical ailments. They had asked if he had been accidentally counted absent in all his classes. I had told them that he hadn't been in third but didn't know the rest. Within the next 6 hours he had been registered missing, officially missing. I've never had something like this happen. I know we were scared. I left school immediately after the last bell rang to go to his house. We all expected him to just be hiding, joking around. He didn't have a bad home life, we knew this as we spent literal hours with him every single day, sleepovers, etc., and his parents were wonderful, even he said they were amazing. To cut it short, he reappeared a month ago. November 12, 2021. With this, we wanted every explanation he could give. Where the duck was he for 4 years? Well, even he didn't know. Doctors have said it could be amnesia, maybe he had a head wound or ended up being kidnapped and escaped, and he was too shocked to speak, but when we were alone, he kind of revealed something. He knew where he was, but he said it wasn't anywhere he thinks someone would have ever seen. I thought he was joking, but he's been seriously sticking to this, that there weren't humans, it was lonely, and after a bit he says he kind of shut down and ended up back here, 4 years later. My first encounter with the demon that follows me and my sister. Long story short, a ghost or demon follows me and my sister. It has occasionally been heard or felt by others in my family. My ex-girlfriend lived in a split family home. You enter the building, and there are stairs up or down with a door at each to enter the different houses. One night I was leaving her house, she was showering, and as I walked down the stairs, I heard what can only be described as something, not someone, imitating her calling my name. Once drawn out, it sounded almost underwater, like slightly distorted. I never once thought to turn back, I froze. A pure, horrified, and sickening feeling took over my whole body. I just knew something wasn't right. I kept going down the stairs quietly, and I heard it again, but this time slightly more aggressively, and I ran. I ran out the door to the curb and looked up into her window and saw what looked humanish. It's hard to describe, but it looked kind of like a girl with long black hair covering most of her face because she wasn't facing me. She was facing the door to her house, and I saw it stare at that door, waiting to see if I'd open it, then it turned and kind of sulked or floated further into the house and out of sight. I stood on that curb paralyzed with fear for a good 10 minutes before driving home. I still wonder what would have happened if I did go back in. I had one more direct encounter with it, as did my no longer skeptical father and my sister. I also have many stories of what may have been this or other entities I've encountered. I plan on sharing them. It took me a long time to even share this one, but my current GF is very supportive of me and will try to stay with me whenever I get that I'm being watched or there's something here feeling. My family was living in a house built before 1865 in Western Mass. My bedroom had a door that led into another sibling's room. One night when I woke up to go to the bathroom, when I sat up, I saw a figure standing at the end of my sister's bed. My first thought was that I was seeing things, maybe some crap in my eyes, or it was all in my head. I calmly closed my eyes and rubbed them and said to myself, I'll open my eyes and look up, whatever I thought I saw will be gone. So I finished rubbing my eyes, and, there it was. I stood up saying, hey. Whatever was there turned around, and I swear its expression was surprise. It moved out of view toward what would be the upstairs hallway. As I entered my sister's room, it vanished from sight. So I went out to the hallway, and there was the family dog. It was looking down the hallway, tilting its head the way confused dogs do. Never saw that again. I had a strange experience when I was 13. My mom and I were moving into a new apartment, and so I was unloading and unpacking in the new place while mom and my dad went to go get more furniture and boxes from the old place. It was about 8 or 9 p.m. when it happened. I had set up my bed and was just relaxing on it while everyone got back when suddenly I witnessed something I can only describe as unnatural. I saw a completely dark claw hand on the top of the door frame, as if something was crawling on the ceiling. I panicked and grabbed my bat that happened to be in a box next to my bed. I walked closer to the door when it suddenly scurried away. You could hear scratching like it was quickly crawling away on the ceiling. I go out into the hall and look down to mom's room. The light was off, but I made out a shadow figure. Whatever it was, it did not seem human. I ran outside the apartment, and luckily my parents were just getting back. My dad swept the place, but no one and nothing was there. Later on, my mom got pregnant, and for some weird reason, she felt terrified of sleeping alone in her room, so she'd often stay in me and my brother's room. She'd say she would have nightmares about something evil hurting the baby. All coming from that room, where I saw the figure. On another occasion a few years later, I was driving home at almost 2 a.m. I looked to my left at a stop sign, nothing. I looked to my right and saw a figure of a woman with black hair, no face, and a gown of sorts. I don't know what it was, but in that moment I felt a terror I have never felt before or since. Something about that entity was wrong. Like an overwhelming weight of evil. I floored it home with the lights on and prayed my heart out with my grandfather and my mom. About 6 years ago I was working on a film for a friend as the film's AD. The location was supposed to be haunted, Post-Town Elementary School near Middletown, Ohio. I did some scout location for this film and was at the school shooting some photographs to be used later when we mapped out the film. Someone important to me was with me and was also taking pictures, mainly for themselves. I felt an uneasy presence while there. Shortly after this, I had a virus attack my heart and landed me in the hospital for an overnight stay and test to make sure it was not a heart attack. A few weeks later we started filming, and I was on set at this location each day before anyone else and stayed after everyone else. I had no paranormal experiences while filming, although almost everyone else with the cast and crew gave various accounts of something paranormal happening to them. We finished the film and moved on. However, shortly after this, the person who went with me during the location scouting had a nervous breakdown. Their whole personality changed, and to be honest, they have not been the same since. A couple of months ago, a group of friends wanted to ghost hunt this location. As a photographer, I was glad to go just so I could shoot some staged spooky shots. Some of my friends were using an EVP, again, something I don't recommend. My wife and I were in another part of the building, but when I met up with the group, they immediately asked me who this person was. The EVP first mentioned my name, then the name of this other person. The person they named was the one who had gone on the location scouting with me and had the breakdown. It also mentioned our location in Ohio. For this, I have the printed EVP as evidence. But I felt then, as I do now, that this was an evil presence, a malevolent Elohim, Hebrew for spirit, a demon that was letting me know that it knew me and what happened. The Belle Vue hauntings. I was born and grew up in a town called Shrewsbury, in Shropshire, England. The town has a reputation for being one of the most haunted places in the world. The town is well over 1,000 years old. A lot of the ruins of old buildings remain, even in the town center. Everyone I know growing up had some sort of experience, haunted or otherwise, at some point in their lives. So, getting to my most haunted experience that spans a number of years, these aren't my only experiences, but this is the one that has affected me the most. My grandparents have a house in the Belle Vue area of the town that all of the family, my mother and her siblings, grew up in. This house has a back bedroom that gives off a vibe that you just don't want to duck with. It's the only room in the house that has the door always closed and is now used as a storeroom that my nan refuses to enter alone. It was used when I was a kid as a spare bedroom for when I and my brother would stay over, but we hated being in that room. One night, I and my brother were asleep in there, and I woke up just in time to look over and see the lighting fixture on the ceiling next to my head. I can even remember the feeling of the cold plaster touching my cheek right before whatever the duck was lifting me let go. I hit the mattress and immediately started screaming, obviously, and my dad burst into the room to find out what happened. I told him everything, but he was obviously skeptical, but I even remember him saying that the room was very cold even though the heating was on and there was an odd feeling he couldn't explain. My brother, who was asleep during my incident, said he had a dream that night of an old man standing over him shouting for him to get out, and to this day he is reluctant to talk about it because of how real it felt. Now, this is where it starts to get worse. I was told this was over a month after the first incident, but I was at home, in my house, on the other side of the town, and it happened again. I and my brother at this time used bunk beds, and I slept on the top bunk. My dad was downstairs watching TV, and all of a sudden he said he got a feeling something was wrong, then realized the feeling he felt was the same as it was when I had the incident at my nan's. He ran upstairs and burst into the room just in time to catch me falling from the ceiling. I had been picked up, lifted over the bed's safety rail, and was hanging with my head tilted towards the ground. My dad burst in to see me hanging there in midair for a split second before dropping, and he caught me. He was terrified and could never explain what happened. Nothing ever happened again until I was in my mid-20s. My nan was heading out somewhere for an overnight stay, so I said I would stay the night, feed the dogs, and sleep on the sofa. I did everything stated, went to sleep on the sofa, but woke up in the morning in the spare room, at the back of the room behind a load of storage boxes. It took me 5 minutes of moving the boxes out of my way to reach the door to get out, and to this day, now 14 years later, I have no idea how the hell I got in that room, over those boxes, and to the back section of the room without damaging anything. I've never been more frightened after waking up in all my life, and I've never stayed another night in that house since. My nan refuses to talk about that room. My granddad was the same prior to his death. I have no idea what happened in that house or what spirit, or worse, is living in that back room, but I'll never go back in that room for as long as I live. I always wished I had a paranormal experience so convincing that I would not be able to explain it away later. I joined a ghost hunting group and had some wild interactions, but I was always able to tell myself, oh, it was this or that to explain it away. But the first fully convincing experience I had made me believe there was much more out there that we did not understand about our reality. I was on a small ghost hunt with 2 other people. The 3 of us went down to the basement speakeasy bar at the historic White Hill Mansion in Fieldsboro, New Jersey, at 3:30 a.m. We were messing around with a spirit box hoping to communicate with the ghost of a bartender said to haunt that location. We were having some incredibly accurate responses to our questions and hearing noises in the room around us. But as I said, I was able to explain all of them away as coincidence or misidentification of ambient sounds. However, my blood froze when I looked up towards the actual bar. I was staring directly at a person. A shadow person to be exact. At the end of the bar stood a 6-foot-tall outline of a man made out of complete darkness. I could make out his head and shoulders and upper body. I was unable to speak. All I kept saying was, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." My 2 companions had no idea what was going on. By the time I was able to make them aware of what I had seen, the shadow person had vanished. There was just the blank wall at the end of the bar. Now, I know for a fact that we were the only people in that small basement, and I know it was not my shadow or the shadows of my companions. Because we were all sitting at the table and the shadow person was standing. I know exactly what I saw. It was a man composed of shadow staring back at me for a few seconds before blinking out of existence. Ever since that evening, I view the world a little differently. If something like a shadow person can exist, then that means there could be so many other things that we don't yet understand about the universe. This actually happened a few weeks ago. My wife was out of town for work, and I was in bed. Around 1 a.m. my son came down in bed. I barely woke up. Then later on in the night, I heard the bedroom door open and close. I woke up and saw a young girl wearing a red sweater and shoulder-length brown hair walk across the end of my bed. I specifically remember seeing her reflection in the mirror. I thought it was my daughter also coming down to get in our bed. She sometimes sleepwalks too. I looked at the clock, and it was about 3 a.m. I watched the girl walk across the end of my bed and start to walk to our bathroom. She then stood in the doorway. So I called out my daughter's name to no response. The girl then started to slowly lift her arms up from her side until they were sticking straight out to the sides. I said my daughter's name again. At this point, I figured she was sleepwalking. But the girl just stood there with her arms out to her sides, motionless. So I yelled my daughter's name again, loud enough that my son woke up. He jumped up and saw the girl as well. I got up, flicked on the light, and there was nothing there. I walked upstairs and saw my daughter was still in her bed. Came back downstairs looking around, and I was standing where this girl was standing, and the floor was warm, like really noticeably warm on the tile. Got back in bed and lay there for a good 45 minutes before I fell back asleep. The next morning I asked my son about what happened last night to see if he remembered or if it was all a dream. He said he remembered waking up and seeing his sister standing in the doorway wearing a red sweater. Super weird, freaked me out, and I have goosebumps just thinking about it again. The corner of the room. A few years ago, my girlfriend and I lived in a small semi-detached house near the canal in Knaresborough, England. Beautiful, charming little town. They are known for the bed race and a crazy guy back in the days who had a questionable zoo there. We moved in, and it was a beautiful late 1800s style that had a cozy, homey vibe. Except the master bedroom, I did not notice the vibe while viewing the place, but when we stayed there the first night, it was considerably colder than all the other rooms. And one corner of the room seemed to be permanently damp. Our dog, little Yorkshire Terrier Duke, could not be in the room with us anymore. He used to sleep with us in the bed, but as soon as he entered, he would rush to the damp corner and bark and growl at the wall. This creeped me out. I was worried about the cold too. Put two and two together, you could say. I told my girlfriend that I thought there might be something paranormal involved here, but she just laughed at me. She has always been skeptical of the paranormal. Anyway, we had to kick the dog out at night so he would bark all night at the wall. One night I woke up, about a week after our move, because of the dog barking and scratching at the bedroom door. It's dark in the room, it's a little lit from the moonlight, and we did not have bedside lamps set up there just yet, so I can't see much. I sit up and am about to lock the dog in the kitchen when I catch a glance to my left. My girlfriend was naked, curled up in a sitting position, holding her knees right in the damp corner. I let out a little scream from the shock that seemed to shock her awake, and she said, "Maurice? What time is it?" I quickly bolted to turn the main light on. She looked disheveled and confused. I put her back in bed and told her to go to sleep. She was prone to sleepwalking, and I had seen her do crazy things before, so this was not too weird by all accounts, but it freaked me out. I was telling this story a few days later to my mate from a nearby town, Harrogate. She asked to come around and have a look. She was into all that spiritual stuff and crystals, etc. She came with her dog into the bedroom, who also immediately started attacking the wet corner. She walked up, kind of touched the wall. 25 seconds later she backed up. Here feels the devil come through himself. I burst out laughing, expecting her to laugh too, but she was very dead serious and just continued to try and convince me to move out now and get my deposit back, so that kind of freaked me out more. The final straw came a short while later at night. I was lying in bed, my girlfriend was staying at her mother's that night, so I was on my own. I have always been fascinated with the paranormal, so I brought in a red candle to the room, lit it, and put on one of the creepiest songs I know, ha ha. It is Peter Gundry's Goetia, the Devil. I placed the candle in the wet corner and closed my eyes on the bed, semi-meditating, just concentrating on any feelings or noises and temperature changes. After about 15 minutes, through my closed eyes, I could see the candlelight start to flicker. The room got significantly colder, and a sense of dread started to overcome me while a smell started to overcome the room of something that I could describe as wet dog mixed with beeswax, maybe? Weird. At this point the track Goetia was playing. I was in such a weird trance state I was scared to open my eyes. So I just waited. I felt a cold touch on my forehead and left upper arm, but it did not scare me for some reason at that point. The next thing I remember is being woken up by my girlfriend in the morning. I was lying naked in that wet corner. We moved out the following week. The ghost experience in the hotel turned me into a believer. So this is an experience I had in 2018, when I was a management trainee with an organization, and it entailed a short 1 or 2 week stint across their major offices in different cities. Our office organized accommodation for us too. For my second stint, I was put in a city where I had never been before and had no friends or acquaintances. So, the company booked a hotel close to the office premises. The room was rather big and seemed quite luxurious, albeit a bit old and shabby. What stumped me the most was how economical it was. The first night was uneventful, and for a woman traveling alone for the first time, it felt secure and comfortable. The second night, at about 9:30 p.m., I ordered in, and after finishing my dinner, I went out of my door to place the food trolley for collection by the staff. Just when I turned around to close my door, I saw someone staring at me from the corner of my eye. The person was at the end of the corridor, and it was very dimly lit. Let me add here that only 2 out of the 20 rooms on the floor were occupied and 10 were being renovated. Hence, the dim lighting at night. When I turned to look, the person ran out of view toward the elevator. I was creeped out and locked the room and reported this to the reception. On the third night, I was engaged in a video call with my mother when I heard heavy pacing and running at approximately 10 or 10:30 p.m. My mom heard it too. I sneaked to the peephole and saw no one. But I heard the footsteps right outside my door. Called the reception and they sent someone to check, who reported that there was no one, and I checked their CCTV footage. No one was there. Fourth night, I got a call on the hotel intercom, and when I answered, I heard only heavy breathing and low growling noises. This continued another 2 times before I called the reception again to raise a complaint. They checked their call panel records and said I had not received calls from any current hotel guest or staff lines. I checked again the next morning just to be sure, and they showed how the system is automated and no one can tamper with it. It showed no incoming or outgoing calls from my room. Fifth night, heard a constant knocking on the wall behind the bed, and it moved across the room, based on where I was standing. This creeped me out much more, and as someone diagnosed with hyperanxiety and depression, it felt like I was losing my mind, and I got an anxiety attack. I ran out of my room to the reception, 2 floors below, and the manager on duty calmed me down, and I was extremely upset. I questioned everyone around, and none of the staff said anything and said it was strange such things were happening. Later, a woman from my hometown, who was currently employed there, accompanied me to a new room they assigned me to. She told me in private that the floor I was on was sealed for 5 years and had recently been opened. Rumor has it that some old hotel staff had hurted a woman, and she was ended in the struggle. The administration covered it up, paid off the perpetrator and family of the victim, and sold this property to the current owners. Since then, people have reported multiple occurrences on that floor. Also, these were major events. Some other small things happened, like the feeling of being watched constantly, cold spots, and feelings of nausea and panic. I checked out promptly the next morning and got another hotel, paid from my pocket, and have since then been extremely scared and anxious to be alone in any hotel room. I never did. Until I lived in a 2-story house, and my son refused to sleep in his room because of the man. I thought it was just little kid stuff. So he started sleeping upstairs with me. Didn't think much of his "the man" comments, woke up one night to see a hand standing by the door towards the foot of my bed. Flipped the light on, gone. Checked the time. Exactly 1200. Weird. Maybe I'm dreaming. Next time. Same exact time, man at the end of my bed. This time I didn't turn the light on, I stared at him. He looked as real as you and me. Turned the light on, gone. Happened every single night. I told my husband. He didn't believe me until one lazy Sunday we were watching TV, nobody had showered yet, and we were sitting there, and the shower turned on. He said, "What the hell is that?" And simply said, "I told you water goes back off." And he ran in the bathroom. Water everywhere. Now he believes me. Cool. Got to where I started sleeping on the couch until past midnight to avoid seeing him and moved. Broke my lease and bounced early. Never said anything. Never did anything hurtful. Nothing. Fast forward to last year, I was lying in bed reading a book on my phone. Wide awake. My bedroom door is shut so no animals can get in, etc. I do have a door leading outside. I'm lying there staring at my phone and otherwise pitch black. I feel the bottom of my bed go down like someone sat by my feet. Hard. I don't move. I text my husband, "Get in here, I think someone came in from the patio door." I'm terrified to move. He runs in. Flips on light, nobody is there. He looked under the bed, and the wood is broken like someone just jumped on the bed. To this day he thinks I jumped on the bed at the end. Nope. Fast forward a few weeks, I walk into the kitchen ready to leave for the gym. Nothing is open. Oh, I forgot my keys in my bedroom. Run back and grab. Gone for maybe 30 seconds, back in the kitchen, all the drawers and cabinets are wide open. Nobody is home but me. I didn't even try to close, I just left. That's just a few major things that I can't imagine there aren't paranormal. There absolutely has to be. No longer a skeptic. When I was a child, I lived with my grandparents on and off. Family members had always talked about how my grandparents' home was haunted. No one ever looked into the history of the house. Over the years I've heard stories about my grandfather getting up in the middle of the night to get a glass of water and walking past people sitting on the stairs. Apparently whenever this happened, he would bring his water back to his room and go back to sleep, only to find the full glass sitting on the steps in the morning. My grandmother would tell stories about how she would have coffee with her mother every morning in the kitchen. Of course, that wasn't possible. My great-grandmother had died decades ago in their home country. There were always stories about people being touched and pushed by unseen forces. Over the years, this all became so normal to them. Obviously, since my grandfather never freaked out about people on his stairs in the night, The upstairs was the worst part. People who went upstairs always mentioned how they felt like they were being watched. My aunt, who would visit with her family every few years, spoke about how one night she and her husband were fooling around in one of the upstairs bedrooms while her kids slept in the room next door. The door was locked since her kids were young, and she figured that walking in on mommy and daddy getting frisky would be traumatic. While carrying on, they could hear the doorknob jiggling. They listened but didn't check on it right away. Whoever was at the door was really trying to get in. After a few minutes, it stops. My aunt and her husband felt bad, assuming that it was one of their kids, and got out of bed to check. The problem was, the kids were all asleep. All of them. My grandparents, too. There was no one else in the house that would have been at the door. Multiple times my mother mentioned feeling like she was being held down in her bed. I always chalked it up to sleep paralysis. The reason I am telling this story is because I used to be a skeptic. I say it used to be. I had never believed in the supernatural. I had been in the house millions of times. I had never experienced anything there. At least not until one night when I was 12. My mom, my brother, and I were living with my grandparents. My mom was engaged. That particular night was actually the night of her wedding rehearsal. It was also Halloween. I was being a cranky kid, so they decided to bring me home. My stepdad-to-be brought me back and assured me that my grandparents would be home soon. They had gone to pick up my aunt from the airport. I had been left home alone plenty of times. I was lying on my bed watching TV in the dark. All the other lights on the house were off except for a night light out in the hall outside my door. No one was afraid of the dark. We just weren't really fans of falling down the stairs. Anyways, in my room, out of the corner of my eye, I can see someone standing in the doorway. I look over at the door, and I can see the dark silhouette of someone standing in the door. The problem was that was all I could see. Just a dark shape of a person. Even in the dark I should have been able to make out some features. The light from the TV should have been enough to see something, but there was nothing. Just a shadow. While staring straight at it, I reached out and turned on the lamp on my nightstand. The light came on, illuminating the room. There was no one there. Without looking away, I turned the light back off. There was no one there. The strangest thing about the whole situation was that I had never seen or heard anything else in that house. Yes, I always felt weird there. Like I was being watched. My grandmother still lives there. My grandfather passed away a few years ago. There have been news stories about someone holding my grandmother's hand at night or jumping on her bed, but as I said, I haven't experienced anything else. I still feel like I'm being watched, and I still don't go upstairs. This happened roughly 5 years ago. I was in my last year of university, and I was living in a shared house with 3 other students. This evening everyone in the house was out. It must have been winter, as I recall it not being that late in the day, but it also being completely dark outside. I got a message that evening from someone I knew asking if they could come over. To provide a little more context, the person who messaged me was an acquaintance at most, someone I had briefly met on a night out and had a handful of conversations with. I must have told her at some point that I lived pretty close to the gym we both went to because she was either going to or from the gym, and it was pouring down. I was wondering if she could stop at mine until the rain cleared. It was a bit out of the blue, but it seemed like a relatively reasonable request given that it was raining pretty heavily that evening. I told her that it was fine for her to come over and to stay until the rain cleared. When she arrived, I was watching a film in my room. As I wasn't expecting any company, I wasn't going to change my plans for that evening, so I told her that she could join me to finish watching the film. It started to get weird a short while after she sat down next to me. I vividly remember getting weird bursts of light filling my vision, not faint specks, but bright, white explosions suddenly clouding my entire view. They came and went pretty quickly, but I'd say it happened 3 to 4 times throughout that evening. I remember at the time trying not to think too much about it. My justification for it was that it was dark, the only light was the light beaming from the TV, and some contrasting light flickers from the film must be playing with my vision. Alongside the light bursts, I kept getting this strong feeling that a hand was hovering over my shoulder, the side opposite to the side she was sitting on. So strongly that I had to repeatedly turn to look over my shoulder to check. I thought she was trying to put her arm over my shoulder. Every time there was nothing there, and I again justified it as being another trick of the light in the dark room. After the film had finished, the rain had stopped, and she was getting up to leave. At this point I was conscious that a few strange things had occurred, but nothing I was going to lose any sleep over. That was until, while she was getting her shoes on, she made a strange twitch with her shoulder. I wouldn't normally call someone out on their seemingly innocent twitches, but I decided to query her this time on why she suddenly jolted. Very calming, without even stopping to look at me while she was doing up her laces, told me that she has a demon that follows her, and every time it touches her shoulder, she twitches. I remember standing, frozen, unsure of what to even say back. I think I mumbled something banal like I see, while my mind was frantically thinking back to how the entire evening I had spent feeling like a hand had been hovering over my shoulder. If she had told me this information at the start of the evening, I could have believed that being predisposed to it had led me to imagine these oddities. But no, I saw it all and then was exposed to this revelation. She finished getting her shoes on and left. Needless to say, I didn't contact her again. I was pretty spooked about the whole situation for a good few days. Nothing odd has ever happened since this encounter, those flashing lights never occurred again, and I never experienced that hovering over my shoulder again. I can't say that this experience has made me a firm believer in the supernatural, but it was definitely the closest I've been to questioning it. This one is not for the faint of heart. It still gives me anxiety when I tell it. Even now, the thought still sends chills down my spine. Anyway, fast forward now from the footsteps up the staircase house. This is 2 years later, and a different crew and I are doing a quick flip for the buyers of an older home. It's not a centennial home but a house, at least in its 80s. New carpet, hardwood floor, skim coat, and paint. Get in, get out. Over the course of several weeks, the following story proceeds to develop. We're shoring in the crawl doing some termite remediation for a week, and I have a conversation with the cleaning crew at the end of the day. Sellers left the house dirty, so the cleaning crew came in after the carpet went down on the second floor. They ask me who the old lady is that's always on the second floor. They say they've talked to her a couple of times, and she seems nice. I tell them there's no one in the house but us. They call me a liar, begin to tell me about the 10-minute conversation they just had, and we all proceed upstairs to the main floor. I've said repeatedly as we climb the stairs there's no one here but us. We walk all around, open every door, no lady. They stand there looking at me dumbstruck. A few weeks later, I'm putting down the new hardwood. A decision is made to push through dinner to get the kitchen and a side office finished, so I go to Subway to get sandwiches. As I'm pulling back in the driveway, I see my helper staring out the kitchen window. Odd, but waiting on dinner, so whatever. I walk in the back door, and the helper is still staring out the kitchen window. It's one of the windows centered over the sink. He has his body contorted in a way as if he's trying to force himself through the countertop and out the window. Now, growing concerned, I ask him if he's okay. No answer. To give context, my helper is a former Marine that was in Iraq for Fallujah. He's scared of absolutely nothing. No man or beast. So I ask him again if he's okay. Without turning to look, he says, "Is she still behind me?" I say, "What? Who is behind you?" "The woman," he says. I pause, then sheepishly answer, "No." He turns, walks out the back door, gets in his Ford Ranger, fires it up, turns on his headlights, and leaves. I never see him again. He doesn't even come back for his check. The very next week, the drywaller calls me while standing in the front yard. Plaster walls are half skimmed. But there's a problem. His tools are inside, and he's not going back in to get them. I drive over to find out what's going on. He says he's never going back in the house again. I pick up his roller, mud pan, and screed and carry them outside. He takes his tools, tosses them in the back of his truck, and says no charge as he's driving away. The electrician comes to the plug and switch. Brings his wife. The electrician knows what's been happening. He doesn't tell his wife. She walks in the front door, and before the storm door on the front can swing closed, she's out the back door. And finally, 6 months after the new owners move in, the house drops the ceiling above the master bed, but get this, just in a human-sized section right over the side of the bed the lady of the house sleeps on. The man of the house could have been asleep, and not a piece of ceiling would have fallen on him. Not a speck. I've seen a lot of shit. I've experienced my fair share of weirdness, as evidenced by these last 2 stories. They are my 2 best. I only have 4. To this day, the memory of the Marine staring out the window, trying to twist his way through the countertop, still gives me the heebie-jeebies so feckin' bad it's almost intolerable 17 years later. Until you have your own experience, it's hard to accept the paranormal as truth. That's the short of it. It's something you just know. I hope that sets the stage for whether I bullshit you with a story or not. I gain nothing from speaking lies, and I live my life pretty well, open and honest. If you believe it, awesome. I hope you get to have your own true experience someday. It's the same hope, even if you don't believe it. Let's continue with the story. My partner is quite sensitive to the other side. Some might call them a medium or conduit, though in recent years they've chosen to close this off since it is physically and mentally taxing and not always wanted. When they were 14, they messed with a Ouija board, and something nasty came out of it and decided to target them amongst the several friends that were there. It had harassed them for years after and also other family members, though they don't believe in that kind of stuff. My partner named it Bad Wolf for simplicity when bringing it up. Also, they are a Doctor Who fan. Skip to living in this house. This entity was still lurking around. Roommates living with them said they saw red eyes in their closet a number of times. I learned that this was one of the hallmarks of this entity from a number of people who had been around my partner. Apparently, this house also had a secret that I had later learned of in one of those medium/conduit sessions. Shortly after moving in, the foundation in the basement cracked. It could be written off as water damage or the age of the house that this happened. After that had happened, an old vengeful woman started attacking everyone who was living in the house. Often, it was with suddenly ramped up anger and aggression that would disappear shortly after leaving the house. There would be no reason for it. The front door would be found pulled open even after having been double locked. The inaccessible attic had a window in it, and one roommate would see the old lady looking out of it. The basement was an unfinished floor, so there was no carpet or anything that would be inviting for pests. The house had an infestation of fleas, but only in the basement. When coming up the stairs, they would jump off and go away before the top, which was carpeted. Back to that secret, apparently, the original owner of the house ended her mother and buried her under the house. When Bad Wolf came in, it somehow broke the foundation, like I said, super bad, nasty, and released the old woman's spirit. BW also enraged it. When they finally moved out, on the last trip to grab stuff, a roommate was getting things out of the basement when they heard claws skittering over wood. Mind you, the main floor is carpeted, so this thing was crawling on the rafters overhead. When they heard that, they spoke aloud without looking back and said, "All right, we're done here," and left whatever wasn't in their hands behind. Found out through the grapevine that the next tenants were really nice people, and within a few months, their demeanors changed. They were somehow growing weed in the carpets, and upkeep of the house went to shit. I tried looking up information about any deaths related to the house or unsolved murders and such, but I didn't find anything. Being a small town, there wasn't much to dig through. When I lived in when we were renovating the basement, we would routinely see the entity in our dining room and living room. Our daughter saw the gray mist floating above her bed a few times, and it would tap on the windows around the house. We thought that it was someone outside until we went outside, and there were 0 footprints in the snow. We would also get random scents of cigarette smoke. None of us smoked. The TV in the living room would turn on, and our late dog would bark and growl at random, which was abnormal for him. All of this activity stopped once the renovations were completed. We actually met the person that lived in that house back in the 80s, and he would ask about the ghost. We even had friends over, and they experienced it firsthand. It never felt negative, or even positive. I'm not sure it knew we were there. Regardless, it was weird. My family has experienced things in other places we have lived. I could have possibly, but I could usually come up with reasons for what was happening. Growing up, my buddy lived in an old farmhouse. That shit had something negative in it. On 2 different occasions, I got scratched and nudged. I never saw anything, but I could feel it, and the scratches were apparent. I've become more and more skeptical since becoming an adult, but there will always be stuff I can't explain. The main incident occurred in my childhood home. I woke up, and in my closet was left open, and on the top shelf was a severed female head staring at me angrily on its side. I watched it for 10 minutes or so, sure that my mind was playing tricks on me. Not to mention, I'd have to cross right in front of it to exit. I finally worked up the courage and ran past it. The entire time, I stared at it. It, of course, stared back at me. I grabbed one of my parents and brought them back. There was nothing there. To this day I refuse to sleep with a closet open in a room. In college my roommates and I also had several weird encounters in a dorm room that we will never explain. I'm fully aware of sleep paralysis, how your mind will manifest a person, but not like this. I'd wake up in full chokehold sitting up, I'd be pushed down a few times, and hear voices threatening me. They'd all originated from the same completely black silhouette shadow man thing. And this would all occur in a bedroom that was private to me. My roommates each had their own locking bedroom, and we only shared a common area. The one I was closest with also had several run-ins. In one experience, he said he walked into the common area, and the entire room was blood red, and he felt just an intense pressure in the air. I attribute my first encounter with the shadow man to an archaeology class. Now granted, I used to be into ghost hunting shows, so there could entirely be a bias here, but I knew the whole spirit strain batteries thing. Well, while in this class, The professor took us to a warehouse on campus where they found Native American artifacts from areas of worship and grave sites that had to be dug up for the school to be built. A law required that they hold onto them until a tribe claimed them as their own. My phone at the time had several low battery warnings. It would buzz once at 15%, twice at 10%, 3 times at 5%, and it would long buzz while turning itself off. In my pocket in the warehouse, it started doing those buzzes, to the point where I thought it was ringing. I pulled it out of my pocket just in time to watch it buzz long and shut itself down. I was on edge after that and felt like something followed me to my dorm. The shadow man seemed to follow me for a while too. I moved every year to a new dorm or eventually rented a house with some friends. Each time there would be a delay, and then it would seem to find me. The experiences I had with it gradually faded away. And I became more and more skeptical of things, attributing the experiences to imagination, sleep paralysis, and false memories. Up until a few months ago, I still had strange experiences. My wife and I lived in a studio apartment above a garage in a building that's nearly 60 years old. Things would fly off shelves occasionally, and most terrifying of all, we had a Google Home speaker that, in total silence, would hear commands that nobody said. It would call random people, play odd music, and reply to nonsensical questions. That was horrifying, but we honestly tried to explain it as we had a glitching unit. Now we live in a brand new home, and literally nothing happens. The old farmhouse. My dad and I flip houses for a living. We do everything, so house renovations can take anywhere from a couple months to a year and up. Here is what happened to us in a 100-plus-year-old farmhouse in Northwest NJ, USA, about 3 years ago. This old farmhouse was beautiful but extremely run down. It had sat vacant prior to our purchasing it for 15 years. Also, there was evidence squatters had been there at one point. The house had good bones, as they say, so it wasn't worth it to tear it down and start from scratch. The first part of our job is cleaning and demoing. I've noticed that every house has its own vibe and energy. However, this old farmhouse was different. It was 4 floors, including basement and attic. Anytime you were downstairs on the main floor, kitchen, living room, and office, it felt fine, normal even. When you went upstairs, it was different. There was a heaviness up there. I would announce every time I came in the house, "Hey, it's just me, is it cool if I come up to do such and such?" I also would announce myself anytime I came into the house downstairs with a, "Hey, how you doing today?" My dad would look at me like I was crazy because I never did this anywhere else, ever. I don't know why I did it here, I just felt the need to. Like a deep itch in my brain, pleading me to say it, so I did. Each and every time. Within the first few days of the clean out and demo, my dad found something disturbing. In the master bedroom upstairs, there was a small closet with a light in it. Hanging on the inside of the closet door on a coat hook was a bloody dog collar. There were weird symbols spray painted only in this closet. Something looked like it had been burned in a pile on the floor of the closet. I refused to touch it and got extremely upset at the sight of the dog collar. Furious even. WTF would do something to a poor animal like this? I was so bothered my dad told me to go home for the day, and I did. It makes me sick thinking about the sick ducks who did whatever to have something like that there. My dad and another coworker cleaned it out. Also, the light in that closet we never got to work. We do minor electrical repairs and couldn't figure it out. Had a master electrician come, they couldn't get it to work either. New light fixture, new wiring, new everything, and nothing worked. When we had finished cleaning out the living quarters, we decided to work on the attic and basement. The basement was okay, honestly, the bottom half of the house, basement and second floor/kitchen, office and living room, felt fine, neutral even. The attic was terrible. I could not bring myself to go up there, not once. To not be an asshole, I worked on the other floors of the house. My dad understood without me even having to explain, which speaks volumes because he is really skeptical. One day, I had to hold the flashlight for my dad while he was in the attic. I stood on the stairs with only my head and upper torso sticking into the attic space. The lights never would work up there either. This attic had one of those pull-downs from the ceiling and foldable ladders. It was located in the hallway between the master bedroom, the second bedroom, and the only bathroom. The second we opened it, a rank-ass smell hit us hard in the face. Death. For sure, something must have died up here, we thought. There were those large, black flies that seemed to swarm to rot and death everywhere. To say it was an infestation of flies is an understatement. I stood on the ladder, almost falling multiple times from ferociously swatting these demon bugs away. My dad looked everywhere for the cause of the flies for days but couldn't find anything. Before we sold the house, we finally got the flies to go away, This was after months of trying, BTW. However, when the new owner chose to rent the house out, the flies kept coming back. To this day, almost 3 years later, exterminators/pest control have been called, and the flies still come back. The master bedroom had something else happen after the closet was cleaned up. I talked my dad into burying the dog collar, by the way. There were 4 windows in the master. 2 windows on the north wall and 2 on the west. The north wall windows one day suddenly had 2 bats on them. They were somehow wedged between the glass and the screen of this old window. We needed to replace all the windows, so we tried everything to free the bats without hurting them. We worked during the day, so the bats were nocturnal, so we figured it explained why they never moved during the day. When we arrived the next day, they seemed to have moved overnight, so we knew that they were alive. These poor bats had me seriously fretting. Any dead bugs I found during the cleanup, I would put into this windowsill, hoping they would eat. I know that's weird, but I'm a diehard animal lover. It appeared they were stuck, and it was killing me to see them like that. It made no logical sense how they got in there either. Also, it was early summer, so they weren't hibernating either. My dad and I decided to get a ladder and try from the outside of the house. He finally got it so that the bats could undoubtedly get out. The bats never moved from that window screen for weeks. One day, they vanished. I thought for a long time my dad had discovered they were dead and disposed of them so as not to upset me. He promises he didn't do this and that, after weeks of them moving barely inches, they had indeed left of their own volition. We finished the house and sold the house. The new owner rented it out to tenants. Tenants would move in, stay for a month or 2, break their leases, and then move out. This has happened 4 times since we finished. After each move out, we were contracted to come and do a fresh coat of paint, deep clean, patch up a hole, or any other fix needed. The feeling in the house never changed. Also, I wanted to add that we told the new owner about all the weirdness prior to them purchasing. My dad is a skeptical guy, and he has no explanation for any of this stuff. My dad also now announces himself anytime we go into the house. We met every tenant that lived there at some point in their rental time. They all seemed like normal people and were not the type to just break their leases for no reason. I feel like the house needs a cleansing or something? To whoever did that poor dog and house dirty, may you reap what you sow. We moved into a home when I was around 11, and we moved out when I was 17. I'm not exaggerating when I say that every night around 2 a.m. I would wake up hearing conversations happening in our living room. It was a garage initially, but it had been converted, and you could never understand what was being said. It was as if multiple people were just mumbling back and forth to each other. It freaked me out at the time, but it was also really interesting. I never told anyone for years, even after we moved out. Around 2016, I and my sister were reminiscing about that home. She randomly mentioned that she thought it was haunted and told me that she was waking up hearing the same conversations in the living room around 2 a.m. This confirmed to both of us that yes, the house was haunted. Her friend Johnny, who regularly stayed the night, also heard the same thing. The funny thing is that we all sleep with fans on, music playing, or leaving the TV on because of those constant experiences. It's not out of fear, but it helped distract us from the whispers we were hearing. I've had a lot of experiences since then. I enjoy the paranormal and learning about it, but that conversation with my sister is what cemented my belief in the paranormal. I was living with my girlfriend at the time. The atmosphere in the apartment was abysmal, as she was cheating on me, and I was stuck there. We were barely on speaking terms at this point and had separate bedrooms. Nobody wanted to come over because the tension was just awful. The start of the problems. We had a couple of issues in our previous place, in the guest room, that made us leave. We had originally used the guest room as our bedroom until one night I woke up to someone standing in our doorway. I screamed at them and started to chase them out of the apartment. I get into the building hallway, and my 5 feet 1 inch girlfriend is on the ground crying because I woke up, screamed "Get the duck out" at her face, and started chasing her. I swear I had seen a shadow figure whose head touched our doorway. That was night 1. We moved out of that room, and a friend temporarily stayed in it later on. He woke up one night and stood in the doorframe of the guest room, just staring at my girlfriend in the kitchen. Dude looks rabidly angry. Just staring at her. I get between them, and he doesn't stop, looking through me. I tell him he needs to get back in the room and calm down. We hear him throwing shit around in the room, so I open the door. He's just standing in the middle of this almost pitch dark room. He had no memory of this. We were there for a year. The new place. So, we get into the new place, I find stuff out that I had suspected, and things get glum. Something that was weird was that her room, master bedroom, was constantly freezing. I'm talking about how we had no central AC, and it would be too cold to sleep in when it was upper 90s in the summer. The animals wouldn't make noise, almost ever. The cat wouldn't go in that room and would hiss and run away from the hallway, often enough that we just put up a child gate. It was quiet in the house, with the exception of the TV, but it was weird because we had a downstairs neighbor, upper/lower duplex, with a kid that you could hear while outside. At night we would hear movement of things, attributing it to the neighbors. When we started hearing things like drawers opening or cabinets and things like plates or silverware slightly moving, we knew it was inside the house. The straw that broke us was when we were both in the living room watching TV late at night. She had a habit of leaving half-drunk water glasses around the house, and we had an old-ass widescreen TV, the big 60 inches box style with speakers built in on the sides. A glass of hers went flying across the room from on top of the TV. We sat there, stunned. There was noise in the master bedroom that sounded like someone walking around and moving things. The dog starts growling at the hallway, the cat is puffed up and near us. Then the cabinet above the breakfast bar, the thing with a window separating the kitchen and great room, swings open. She grabs the cat, I grab the dog, and we book it out of the house and to her mom's. We heard the door slam behind us while we were getting down the stairs, as we didn't even bother closing it. I didn't even have a shirt on, we just wanted out of there. We stayed at her mom's until we had to go back to get our stuff. We stayed in there another 2 months before getting a new place, where we didn't have any more issues until we finally broke up. When I was a little kid, my family moved to the hills of West Virginia and lived in a small house that was built in the 20s. I hated this house, specifically my room. How my room was set up was that my bed was in a corner and my closet was directly across from my bed. Facing the closet, to the right, was a doorway with no door leading into a playroom. The door to leave my room was to the left of my closet on the wall that my bed was on. Every night, I sat there staring at my closet door. My dog, who is a bigger husky shepherd mutt, would lay at the door whining to get out of my room, as I made her stay with me, which she never did in any other room, even when she needed to go outside. My fearless dog hates being in my room. After a while, the fear didn't get any better. I would beg my parents to let me stay at my grandparents' house, which was next door, or for my dad to stay in my room with me until I fell asleep. I had never had trouble going to sleep on my own, so my parents thought this was just some way to get attention or something. Well, one night, all of this fear and everything else came to a head. I was lying in my bed, pillows stacked up so I wouldn't have to see my closet door, hiding under the covers. I heard my dog yelp. This being odd, I peeked out of the covers and saw nothing. As soon as I laid back down, I heard the handle fall off of my old closet door. The handle falling off wasn't something new, as it was only a front knob and a rod and was found on the floor quite frequently. No one thought a thing of it and would just pick it up and place it back in the hole. When I heard the knob fall, I terrifyingly looked over, and no one nor I had ever actually seen it fall before. Since the door was old, the knob kept the mechanism latched so the door wouldn't open. Since the knob was out, the door creaked open like in a horror movie. At this point I was so scared I couldn't move or scream or do anything. My dog is at this point whining very loud but not loud enough for my parents in their room to hear. Then she stopped. Just stopped. I looked at the open closet door and saw a small, frail boy with a huge head. All of him was black except for where his eyes should be. He slowly turned and looked at me, and I didn't feel fear, I felt devastation. I felt the most extreme anger and sadness and intense emotions I have ever felt. It wasn't natural. After what seemed like forever, I bolted out of my room, sobbing, and ran to my parents. My parents never let me sleep with them, so my father took me back to bed and waited until I fell asleep. From then on, I would throw actual fits if I wasn't allowed to stay the night at my grandparents'. On nights I had to stay home, this same experience would happen every single night. I wouldn't sleep if I stayed at my house, so my parents gave in and let me stay with my grandparents most nights. It got to the point where my mom was telling my godmother what was happening, and she offered to bless the room, as she was a devout Catholic. After this, things got better for about a week, and then all collapsed into the same horror show every night. My parents aren't very religious but eventually decided to test it out for themselves. My mother stayed in my room one night and decided that we needed to move the next day. I've never seen that little boy again, but the thought of it brings me to tears. I don't know what it was. I believe in the supernatural, it's kind of hard for me not to. I wasn't the only one to experience this. My old house was tested for any kind of leaks or slow poisoning and was clear. After selling it, we found out that the people that lived there refused to use that room, which I found interesting because they never knew what had happened. My stay in the oldest building, built in 1260, in Zurich, Switzerland back in October of 2017, my band and I were in the middle of our 2-week-long European tour. It was a great experience, however, what I experienced there will probably be with me the rest of my life. In fact, it is something I can't rationalize or explain to myself. Anyway, here's some backstory. There were 4 of us, driving around Europe in a Honda Jazz all the way from Scotland, plus musical equipment and clothes. Some venues, including this one, would offer accommodation and food on top of our fee, which was amazing, and you can imagine, after being in cramped conditions on the road for 9 hours at a time, we weren't really wanting to turn anything like that down. After our gig, some of the band wanted to go out and see the local nightlife. I, on the other hand, just wanted to lie down, relax, and just browse the internet, as we were coming to the end of the tour, and I was in need of some downtime. We were led up to our room, which was above the bar, which we assumed would be a very basic room with a bed and bathroom, and this led us into one of the most modern Airbnbs I've ever stayed in. It was super clean and super high-tech, with 2 big, massive bedrooms with king-sized beds, a shower and jacuzzi bath, a massive kitchen, and beautiful wooden floors. I decided to sleep on the floor of the living/kitchen room on my blow-up mattress, which was open-planned, and the linking communal room to the bedrooms and bathrooms. As my bandmates were getting ready to go out on the town, I saw a leaflet on the kitchen table that said that this building had been around since 1260, which was incredible, as you would never know, as the building and bar had been renovated to the point that you didn't really see any of the old designs anymore. So, I said goodbye to my bandmates as one of them mentioned they were going to bathe when they got back. I shrugged it off and asked him to be quiet and to try and not wake me, as my bed was real close to all the doors as it was in the middle of the communal room. After they had left, I turned over and went to sleep pretty quickly. I woke to the sound of a dripping tap. It was pretty dark, but my eyes adjusted fast. The lights of the city were coming through the cracks in the blinds. My first reaction was being mad at my bandmate for not turning the taps off properly after he had a bath. Turns out later that he never ended up having one. I turned over and saw it was about 3:30 a.m. on the wall clock. I threw the blankets over my head and closed my eyes again. Then it happened. What almost felt like a large weight came down on the bottom left corner of my bed. If you've ever been on a bouncy castle and when weight is distributed from one side and inflates the opposite side. Except this launched me about an inch in the air. This was the first time I had felt real, sobering fear, like an ice shock down my spine, probably the adrenaline in hindsight. I remember I stopped breathing, my heart was racing, and it was silent in the room. I felt it again, this time less abrupt, more like a kid nudging you for attention. I remember thinking, this isn't in your mind. This is actually happening. Terrified, I threw the blankets off me and looked down towards the foot of my bed. I didn't see anything at first until I looked further back beyond the dining table, which was maybe 2 feet from the foot of my bed. I noticed a shape. I blinked several times to be sure, but I swear I saw a girl with no face and long hair down to her feet. She was about 5 feet 6 inches, as pale as anybody could be, and she almost looked sodden. As if she had been in the rain. I tried to scream, but I couldn't, and I threw the blanket over myself and told myself to go to sleep. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I woke up, I saw one of my bandmates sitting at the dining table working on his laptop. I was so relieved that it was daytime, I sprang up immediately and told him what happened. Of course, half asleep and ranting about a ghost. He told me it was a dream and to calm down. My other bandmate, Gary, who had slept in one of the bedrooms, woke up and joined us. He looked pale as a sheet. I asked him if he was okay but assumed he was just hungover from last night's antics. When we had packed our things, 2 of the boys went and got the car while Gary and I minded our belongings in the lobby over a cigarette and coffee. I asked Gary how he slept, and before I could say anything, he replied, "Mate, you would not believe me if I told you." I stared at him for a couple of seconds and asked what had happened, thinking it was a bar story or a funny story, perhaps. I couldn't have been more wrong. Let's also state that Gary and I are skeptics, which doesn't mean we don't believe in ghosts, just that we are the type of people that need proof before blindly believing anything. He began to tell me in the middle of the night that someone had gotten into bed with him. He had awoken to the feeling of the blanket lifting up and someone sliding in next to him. He told me that he was too petrified to move or call out and just tried to make himself fall asleep like me. And he never had the bath he intended to take. So that explained why he looked pale white when he woke up. He was not intending to tell anyone because it sounded so unbelievable. We stared at each other for a while and said we'd never sleep another night in Zurich. I wouldn't call myself particularly skeptical, as I've always been open-minded enough to have an interest in it. The reason for my comment is because I was watching BuzzFeed in the Viper Room just last night. While I usually watch them for the comedy aspect rather than the actual investigation, I found it really weird how the spirit box reacted when he tried speaking to River Phoenix. He starts the conversation by complimenting the actor's work and mentioning a movie he loved, which River was in. The spirit box interrupts him to say, "Thank you," and if I remember correctly, they ask who that was, and the spirit box replies with River. I don't know how the device works, and I usually don't see anything particularly freaky happen with them, but up until that point, the spirit box wasn't really getting any responses, and it was just really weird how it instantly reacted to River Phoenix, and each response correlated somehow rather than being interrupted with the usual jibber-jabber. Whether that's a coincidence or it was set up somehow, I really have no idea, but I'm usually even more skeptical when it comes to the famous cases because it just seems less likely to me for some reason. However, there was undeniably something unusual about that location. The spirit box went on to get pretty active and it switched from Phoenix to talking to the previous owner, who's rumored to be buried beneath the club. That part is also pretty freaky in the sense that almost every response correlated without having any interruptions in between that didn't mean anything. Years ago, we moved into a new house, and the previous owners left behind a bunch of stuff they just didn't feel like taking with them, including a giant TV. My mom and I decided to have a root beer float night and watch a movie on our new giant TV. Another thing the previous owners left was a coffee table that had a glass top. We were talking after the movie and after finishing our root beer floats and snacks. We looked at our dishes on the table because we were going to put them in the kitchen. We both watched as one of the glass bowls slid across the glass table. It went a couple of inches, at least. We both were weirded out, but the logical explanation was that there was probably water or something on the table, and the table or the floor might be sort of slanted, and it was just one of those weird flukes created by these particular conditions. I picked up the bowl and felt the table. Dry. Just to confirm, my mom also felt the table, and we looked at the bowl, and it was indeed dry. We sat there, honestly trying to come up with a normal explanation for why that would happen. But there was nothing. The bowl just moved across the table on its own. Over the years, we have both experienced unexplainable things. I used to be afraid of the dark, so she would sit in my room and wait for me to fall asleep. I remember feeling someone stroke my head while I was lying in bed, and it had woken me up. I asked her about it the next day, and she said it wasn't her. My dad had been working late, and my sister never really came into my room. However, my mom did mention that the same night, she felt someone push the back of her head while she was sitting in the chair waiting for me to fall asleep. There is another time in another house we lived in. I was lying in bed, and I looked up just as my door started to swing open. I called for my parents, thinking it was one of them. I get out of bed and stand in the middle of my room. You know how when someone passes by you, you can kind of feel their footsteps or their presence? I felt something walk around me. I could feel it on the floor, and it was that feeling like when someone walks past you in a hurry. I was looking around trying to see it, but there's nothing there. Whatever it was, it walked all the way around me. A moment later, the door closed all the way. Mind you, there are no windows or doors open that would create that pressure to move the door like that. I immediately open my door and go out into the living room to ask my parents if either of them had opened my door. Of course, they said they hadn't. My parents aren't the type of people to play practical jokes like that either. They don't like it, so they wouldn't do it to someone else. So what I'm saying is, until something like that happens to you, especially if it happens multiple times, it could be hard to believe. I don't blame you. These are just a few examples, and mild ones, too. I've had more insane and scarier things happen to me. Intense déjà vu, seeing people do bizarre things, shadows. It makes me sound crazy when I talk about it, it makes me feel crazy. But I know 100% that it happened. I've always experienced and believed in the paranormal. I lived with my in-laws since 2017 in their backyard in a tiny home with my then fiancé. I was 19, and he was 20. My in-laws were renting their house for a few years, and the landlady decided their contract was up a year later, moving in with them. The event takes place in 2018-19. This house was already eerie from the moment I stepped foot there. Once I moved in, I guess the activity picked up. Some days I'd take a picture of these stairs we had in our tiny home, and there'd be small orbs around that area. Then, moments later, I would take the same picture, and the orbs would be gone. Could have been dust or a camera fixture, but it seemed weird to me. We had a dog since she was a puppy, and she was already 2 years old at this point. She would growl and look up at those stairs. When no one would be at my in-laws, I'd sneak her inside their house, but she would be so hesitant. She would back away immediately and look scared. As the days got closer to moving out, things were getting slightly more odd. In my tiny home, I had this leather futon couch. I and my then fiancé will sit on it during the day and lie on the mattress at night. During the day, he was sitting there. He felt extreme pressure on the back of his head. I, being into the paranormal, decided to take a picture of him. After looking back at the image, I was creeped out. Behind him, close to his ear, almost like it was whispering to him, was something that had bat-like ears and had a huge grin on its face. I wish I could have kept the picture, but my partner, being superstitious, deleted it from the phone. I sketched it out, though, not sure if I still have the sketch. Days later, we were finally moving out. That included our tiny home. We were moving in with my in-laws still, so we packed up our stuff as well. I would always wear my engagement rings and always place them in this specific jewelry box. On the moving day, I kept looking for them like crazy. I always kept that box on top of a small dresser. Always. The box was there, but no rings. I started to cry, but my then fiancé told me, calm down, they would appear after moving into the house. Before completely leaving the empty house, we took one last photo of the rooms from inside my in-laws, and that thing appeared once again in what used to be his room before moving in together. This time, it was more visible, and the grin seemed much wider. How I wish he had kept the pictures and not deleted them. It would have backed up this experience 1000%. The new house, we didn't plan to add electricity to our tiny home yet, so we were staying in one of the new rooms. As we're unpacking, I started to take out clothes from bins to hang or fold them properly. Then I saw my engagement rings in a pile of clothes, along with a mysterious black ring. After putting my rings on, I picked up the black one, and my heart sank. I felt shivers down my spine. I showed it to my then fiancé, and he turned pale. I'm not sure where that ring came from. We weren't into buying jewelry, let alone buying rings. The chilling part was that it had PLS smile engraved. 2025, I still have that ring. I'd why I kept it lol. Maybe whatever we saw in pictures manifested on that mysterious ring. Who knows? It's something I can't explain. I was out on my boat with my dad, coming back from an island for lunch. There's this lighthouse really far away on a huge rock that sticks out and would ruin ships, and they were getting ready to construct it and to replace the current bulb with a solar-powered LED one to save money. Nobody was out there at this point in time. We were close enough to it that we could see the features of the rock and lighthouse, but also relatively far away. I look to the left of it, and there's this dark black square. I start thinking, Duck, I'm so tired. And then ask me, Dad, if he can see that black square. He said yes. I was super confused and freaked. It was a bright sunny day, and the square was half the size of this already huge lighthouse. I thought to myself it was surely some scaffolding tarp that had been caught in the wind, but the thing didn't flap and stood perfectly still. It got thinner and thinner, and then poof. Vanished. I still have no idea what the duck it was. Something happened to me that completely shattered my worldview and convinced me that I had personally experienced a truly unexplainable situation. I graduated high school in 1998 and was dating a girl with all kinds of issues who I should not have been seeing. My mother said if I stayed in a relationship with her, I could not live at home. We lived in a small rural town, and my girlfriend's home was several miles away on a lonely back road. I decided to live in my car, smart, I know, while I figured things out. I would park my car at the gate entrance to a field near her home and sleep there at night, walking through some woods and across the field when I left her house. Her 2 dogs would follow me to the car and then go back home after I was inside. Not far into my new setup, one night as I approached my car, I swear I heard the beat of drums. Not drum set drumming, but like tribal sounding drums. It was somewhat faint, but it was distinct in the silence of the rural area. It was then I recalled the stories I had heard in elementary school of a supposedly satanic cult in the area. They had some land at the end of a dead-end road, about a mile north of my parking spot. I became instantly scared and climbed into my car quickly. The back seat would fold down, and I could fit halfway into the trunk of the car. That's how I slept for the several weeks I lived there. Every night I could hear the drums. One night the dogs didn't leave my car. Rather, I awoke to them growling at something, bumping the underside of my vehicle as they moved around beneath me. The final straw came one night after getting into my car. As I sat in the driver's seat, preparing to climb into the back, I happened to make out a silhouette against the horizon in the field I had just crossed. It was a human form made of shadow silhouetted against the less dark night sky. Thinking my girlfriend or her father, who didn't know I was out there, followed me, I turned on my headlights to verify who they were and discovered that nobody stood in the field. I had enough of that and drove about 10 miles away to the parking lot of a rural church and felt better sleeping there. Needless to say, that relationship did not last, and I moved on to other things not long after that. Almost a year later, I became friends with an older lady who lived nearby. I found out she happened to live on the dead-end road where I swore I heard the drum sounds coming from. I asked her one time if she ever had any strange experiences or any harassment from the cult at the end of the road. She told me the cult had been gone for about a decade at that time, so my school days info was not correct, and they had left before her family even moved onto the street, but she did have odd things happening there after first moving in. She said that her 3 daughters would routinely see shadowy figures moving outside between the trees on their property and also hear what she called Indian drums. She said this having no idea what had happened to me. Once, she said her youngest daughter, 4 years old at the time, was sitting by the stereo speakers in the living room with her ear up to them. Someone in the family asked her what she was doing, and she said, listening. They found it somewhat humorous because the stereo wasn't on and asked her what she was listening to. The young daughter looked at them and replied, "They say, there is justification in killing your parents." Freaky stuff. I knew then that what I experienced almost a year before was not the cult that had long ago moved away but something far more sinister that had remained in the area. I don't know. Always had paranormal experiences but different ones and not sure how I would theme them. When I was younger and lived in the grounds of an old college, I would see people, lots of them, walking towards the main college building. Sometimes they would just be walking and oblivious to me, sometimes they would be standing at the side of the road looking at me. They were wearing old Victorian clothing and looked like old sepia photos in coloring, like faded. I didn't realize they were spirits until I asked my mom why all these people were looking at me. When I worked in a nursing home as an adult, I saw what I thought was a real person walk past the room. Went out, no one was there, and nowhere they could have gone. Another time I saw an old lady in my partner's parents' home, elderly, straggly hair, holding a hospital drip thing that you walk along with. But it didn't feel like I saw her with my eyes, more with my mind, but she was there? It was weird. Also, once I woke up while living there to an almighty bang on the cupboard, like something huge crashed into it. Nothing fell inside or out. Another time saw a human-shaped thing that was a glittering golden color, like the golden color was emitting from it. Or he felt like he was. In one house I used to have visions of these 2 twin kids with curly blonde hair. The house was definitely haunted by children. My parents used to hear kids running around, would go up, and we'd all be asleep. I've seen a black thing above me with red eyes and multicolors around it. One of the strangest things that happened to me was when I was at my then friend's house talking about the paranormal shit that was happening there. House didn't feel particularly active, in fact not at all. Then she said it was upstairs. Okay. Her stairs had like a mini landing where it would turn to the next bit of stairs, and I swear to God it was like walking through something, you know, like movies where they walk through a hazy kind of portal thing. It was like that, and I felt the energy of the home completely change, and instantly I was on edge. We carried on upstairs. The kids were playing in the room at the end of the hall. To get there, you have to pass the master room and the small middle room. Master bedroom, May. Middle bedroom, creepy AF. Didn't want to go in there. Carried into the room our kids were playing in, they were bouncing in the bed, my friend and I were looking into the bedroom, and as we went to walk through the doorway, we were both hit by some energy of some sort passing through us and pushing us back, both of us. We looked at each other, looked around the room, grabbed our kids, and went downstairs. When we plucked up enough courage, we went back to the room, and the big dollhouse on top of the drawers had completely been turned around to face the wall, but the room energy was less. Weirder yet, when I was in that turn of the stairs, I felt an angry presence, and I don't remember if it was in the stairs or the experience in the doorway, but I knew this was an elderly woman doing it. I saw her again in my mind. Also had auditory things happen. Alien stuff. So much stuff. But all so different that it wouldn't fit in the categories. Sensitivity to this stuff runs in my family down the maternal line. I'm one of 5 siblings, 3 of us girls and 2 boys. We all have experiences. One of my sisters has the most, then me and my other sister, then one of my brothers, and the other brother the least. My children, my daughter the least, my son the most. I also have intuitive things. I know things about people and sometimes know how things will turn out. Our mom taught us how to turn off this stuff. Doesn't always work, and it scares me, but I kind of just live with it. My only paranormal experience was wild. Okay, so to start this, I want to say I'm now an adult 28-year-old male. This story happened when I was around 15 years old and to date still blows my mind. Okay, so for context, when I was 15, I was a little pothead. I loved smoking weed, so whenever I got a chance, which was basically every day, I would get high with my friends. We'll come back to that later. I grew up in a town in the UK that was huge for a town. We had nearly 100k residents, so yeah, pretty big. Where I used to live was in, like, an estate full of houses. I had a best friend at the time who lived about a 20-25 minute walk from my house, but in order to get there, you had to walk through a wooded area that led to a big lake that you would walk around to get to near his house. So one day randomly I was out with my friend, who I just mentioned, plus many others when we noticed a lot of police presence in the area near the woods, plus there was a police helicopter up in the air. Being curious, we followed the police to the woodlands that separated our houses. We went through the woods to the lake, where the police and ambulance workers were among many bystanders at this point. We got there and started asking people we knew about what happened. We were told that a young boy around the age of 7 had drowned in the lake near the path where everyone was gathering. Over the next couple of days, police were trawling the lake looking for the child, who they knew was there because his friend ran for help when he fell in and couldn't get out. 2 or 3 days after he slipped, the authorities found the young boy's body, which was big news in my town. No later than 24 hours after the boy was found, the local council installed a black metal bench on the footpath near where he died with a little plaque commemorating his life. Okay, so that very next day I was out with my friend over near where I lived. We were getting high with a bunch of other friends we knew. By the time we were done getting high, we decided to go back to his house to sleep because my mom would have gone crazy over the fact that we were high. We started to walk back to his house at around 11 p.m. It was really dark out. We passed my house and eventually got to the woods. We walked through the woods and got to the start of the lake. We started walking down the side of the lake down the path towards where the kid drowned and the bench was. We were just talking nonsense as high teens did when I noticed that when the bench got into sight, there was a man sitting on the bench. Now I was a bit freaked out by this but didn't say anything yet. It was 11 p.m. near the woods in the dark. It was creepy, but when I got a little closer, I noticed I could see what the man was wearing, and he was dressed as a priest. You know, black jacket, white collar. Upon seeing this priest, I sighed some relief because I just presumed he was praying or something of the sort for the kid that drowned in that spot about 4 days earlier. So after noticing this priest, I just watched him sit there as I got closer and closer. I didn't say anything to my friend who was right next to me, but we collectively stopped talking once we noticed the man. As we got closer, it was more obvious he was a priest, and then once we got within about 5 meters, he was gone. Like, gone. I felt like I blinked, and he just disappeared. When we were walking past the actual bench where I saw him sitting, there was nobody there, but if he had gotten up and walked away, I'd have seen him. It's a one-track walkway. After I got to the bench, I turned to my friend, who was just as confused and spooked as I was. I asked him if he'd just seen that man sitting on the bench. I didn't want to say what type of man because the way he was dressed was very obvious as to what type of man he was. But as I asked him, "Did you just see that man sitting on the bench?" He said, "Yeah, the guy dressed like a priest." When I tell you my heart sunk, I can't explain that feeling or that situation to this day. What gets me is I purposely asked my friend if he had seen the man, and he corrected me by saying the man was a priest. If it was a person, they'd have had to get up and walk away from us in a straight line down the path, which we'd have seen, or they'd have had to walk past us, but no, when we got close, poof, gone. Still to this day, it's my only paranormal experience, but it blows my mind every time I think about it. This probably isn't paranormal, but it is weird. I had a dream, I don't remember what it was about, but it involved crossing a bridge, like a rope bridge with wooden planks. The whole world was yellow-orange, like it was a strangely bright sunset or the world was on fire. So I'm about to cross this bridge, and suddenly everything gets bright, and I wake up. Well, I woke up standing at the top of my stairs, toes hanging off the edge. What woke me up was my muscle memory of turning the light on as I passed. So even though I was sleepwalking, my hand still instinctively flipped the light switch at the top of the stairs. I was afraid I'd do it again and break my neck from falling down the stairs, so I put my dresser in front of the door and went back to bed. Well, when I woke up, I moved the dresser back, exited my room into the hallway I had woken up in the night before, and the light was on again. But everyone was still sleeping. Not only that, but the bathroom light was on too. And in the bathroom was a large carving knife. I had no idea what happened, so I asked my mom. Apparently the same night as me, but after I went back to bed, she also started sleepwalking. She said she had to get the knife to cut the bridge down. She said evil things were trying to cross the bridge and get her, so she used the knife to cut it so they couldn't cross. After she did this, she woke up in the bathroom with the knife. So she put it down and went to bed. Really weird, and I haven't had a sleepwalking incident before or since. This happened to my fiancé and me last year. Last March, my fiancé and I were lying in bed at about 11 in the morning, and we were just waking up. I was fully awake and had been for about 15 minutes. He was awake kind of halfway, in that state where he kind of wanted to go back to sleep and kept shutting his eyes but couldn't quite drift off. I remember I kept asking him if he wanted to get up yet and if he wanted breakfast or lunch. He kept saying he didn't know yet. I was lying on his left side, closest to our bedroom door, which was shut. I had my back facing the door, and I had my left arm kind of thrown over his chest, rubbing his arm and looking at his face, being affectionate as I was thinking of all the things I needed to get done that day, just kind of looking at his face and enjoying being quiet with him. He was lying on his back, face turned up toward the ceiling. All of a sudden, the atmosphere in our room got really heavy. Like we were in a pressurized chamber or something, and we both felt it at the same time. I started to panic a bit, thinking it was just me. He opens his eyes, looks at me, and goes, "Do you feel that?" "I can't move," I said. "Yeah," that I was dizzy and couldn't quite breathe very well, and he said, "Yeah. It's like something's pressing down on my body." "What's going on?" I remember staying in that position, with my back to our closed bedroom door, staring at his face as we both kind of panicked at this weird feeling as he kept asking what was happening. I told him my ears were popping. He said his were, too. I remember trying hard to move or roll over, and I couldn't. Then we heard it. The doorknob to our bedroom started turning back and forth, not like someone was trying to come in, it wasn't locked, but like somebody was playing around and turning it back and forth in a perfectly timed rhythm, back and forth, keeping time. I glanced over my shoulder, slowly, because it was still so heavy, and it was hard for the both of us to move, and I could see the doorknob just turning back and forth in that quick rhythm. And then, and I have goosebumps just writing this, two young, female child voices started singing along with the rhythm of the turning doorknob. They sounded like two little girls, anywhere between 5 to like 10 years old, and they began to sing kind of what sounded like a nursery rhyme type song that we couldn't quite understand the words to. I'd never heard it before, but all I could make out was something, dancing. And then it repeated, something, dancing. I hope I'm explaining this well enough. Like every time they sang a word, they'd turn the doorknob one way, then on the next word, back the other way, so the doorknob turning kept time with each word they sang, like each syllable. Seriously, the only word my fiancé and I could understand was the last word at the end of each refrain, which was dancing. I stared at my fiancé's face the whole time this was happening, and his eyes opened so wide, and I saw him slowly turn his head to stare at the doorknob. The look on his face as this was going on was just this combination of shock, terror, and disbelief. I'll never forget his eyes looking so wide and terrified like that. I've never seen that expression on his face before. He's so calm and unflappable normally. I could tell that he couldn't quite believe what we were hearing and seeing, and I could tell he was hearing the exact same thing that I was, two little girls singing a song or nursery rhyme about dancing as they turned our doorknob back and forth to the rhythm/syllables of the song. And I'll never forget the tone of their voices, like, they sounded so playful. The way I described it later to our family members was that they sounded like two little girls maybe doing this to tease, or get the attention of, like, an older sibling or parent who was in another room with the door shut. My sisters used to do very similar things when I'd be alone in my bedroom and they wanted to tease me or disrupt my concentration. It just sounded so taunting but playful, and like they were having fun and kind of laughing while they did it. Then, the doorknob stopped turning as they ended their last stanza/refrain of their song, and we seriously heard the same voices giggling and squealing, like they were excited at what they just did and knew they got our attention. And then it all stopped, like someone turned off a recording. And at the exact time that the singing, giggling, and turning of our doorknob stopped, that heavy, pressurized feeling over our bodies lifted. It lifted just like a snap of the fingers or like someone threw a switch, and my fiancé whispered, "Did that really just happen? Did you hear the same thing I did?" I was shaking, and I said, "Yes." He literally shot up out of bed, kind of throwing me a bit, and he raced to our bedroom door and yanked it open. Nothing there. He goes, "Drew Sparrow, come over here and see this. You have to see this." I was really scared, and I just sat on the bed, scared of what he wanted to show me. I just still felt like I was in shock, and I was just shaking so hard. Finally, when he insisted some more, I got up and went to the door. The air right in front of our bedroom door felt weird, like it was swirling. I'm trying to come up with a good word to describe it, but it felt hot and oily and like it was swirling, almost. And from the spot in front of our bedroom door in the living room, we live in a small little rental house that doesn't have a hallway. Our bedroom door opens right into the living room. We could see this trail of mist. It was like a white, swirly, foggy mist. Like fog or clouds, and it went in a trail through the air from the spot in the living room right in front of our bedroom door, through the living room, trailing into the dining room, then into the kitchen, and then finally into the laundry room, where there are two huge windows. It's all a straight shot, if you stand in our living room. You can look into every single room I just listed, it's all just one room right after another. You can see clear to the other side of the house, which is the laundry room with the windows, and the trail of the foggy, misty stuff ended in the laundry room right in front of the big, long windows. We followed it, and the air where the mist was just still, all oily and hot feeling. It was so weird, and we actually went back into the bedroom and discussed what we heard, and he sang back the muffled song we heard to me, and he even got the tune of it right. I'll never forget the tune/melody of it, and agreed that we couldn't make out much of the words except for the word dancing at the end of the refrain/stanzas. He sang back the exact song I heard, and then he even described the giggling when they finished. It was just the most bizarre thing we'd ever experienced. It was certainly one of the most bizarre things I'd ever experienced personally, in my entire life, and it left me really shaken and unnerved, and I begged him to stay home with me from work that day. I did not want to be alone. He couldn't take off on such short notice. So I stayed home alone, but I literally, even in the middle of the day, turned on every light in the house and kept the TV loud so I'd feel like I wasn't alone. It kind of helped, but I was really jumpy in our own home for a very long time after that. It never happened again, though. While I've never seen anything spooky, I've definitely felt some pretty weird stuff, particularly in my first childhood home I lived in as a baby. I and my family only lived there for about a year, but I would occasionally accompany them to help with repairs through the years, as they would rent it to people who would leave it in terrible condition. No matter how many times I'd step foot into that house, I always felt a sense of unease and heaviness in the air that would hit me immediately. There were two rooms in particular that I hardly walked into specifically for that reason because it always felt stronger, getting to a point where I would feel like someone was watching me and would creep the duck out of me because I didn't know how to explain it and never told my parents because obviously they wouldn't believe me. There was also a smell that permeated the air, nothing like sulfur or anything rotten like you'd hear in other stories or in movies. To be honest, I can't even describe it, almost like a weird paint smell as if the walls were constantly wet with it. There weren't any issues with leaks, wiring, or mold, and my parents never had to repaint much, but it just always stuck around. It was always in the air, even if we had the windows open while cleaning because it got hot in the summer. You'd think an air freshener or cleaner would mask it after so many families came in and out. What's even weirder is that the families that would rent the place never stayed longer than a few months, the longest being a year. It wasn't until I was around 17 when my mom admitted to some weird stuff happening when they first lived there. Apparently my mom would always hear what sounded like someone opening and looking through the pantries and walking around the house. Thinking it was an intruder, both my mom and dad would go to investigate, but instead of finding a person, they would discover almost all of the pantry doors open. This happened multiple times. My mom isn't someone to lie about things like that or even discuss the paranormal. She's incredibly religious, and even watching a movie about ghosts is enough to upset her, so I immediately believed her when she told me. It's been 13 years since I've stepped foot into that house, but I've never experienced anything else like that place. Part of me wants to ask my mom about it more, but I'm honestly too scared of angering her. Has anyone else had a similar experience or other weird stories? Years ago I inherited a house. My parents never having stayed in one particular room of the house, always just stayed in the master bedroom, never gave us any negative back history or anything. Besides things that would need fixing or replacing throughout the home. At the time I moved in, I wasn't aware that, as a person who has died and been brought back, I am very sensitive to certain things. Looking back, it's clear that from the very beginning, we experienced a constant stream of small events. However, we always passed it off, made sensible excuses for things, and/or ignored it. We were skeptics, tbh. Even when we saw the light orbs above our newborn's crib with our own eyes, and in fact, my ex-partner took pictures on his iPhone, at midday, I simply dismissed them as dust in the air caused by the sun shining in an odd direction. I simply excused it as dust in the air with the sun shining in an odd direction or something. Our daughter, who nearly died 4 times and spent 11.5 months in the NICU after being born at 24 weeks gestation and weighing 1 pound 7 ounces, is truly a miracle. Well, all of a sudden, after adjusting to the life of new parents, we started remodeling, and this specific week, the heavy energy in the house turned almost angry. It's the only way I can explain how it felt. And adding to it anything that could go wrong did. So adding to that, this week my late husband kept waking up and wasn't sleeping right. Finally, one night, he awoke in a total panic but in total paralysis. Dry heaving and gasping. When he finally managed to move his arms, he hit me and yelled, "Why are you sitting on my back? I can't move." But I couldn't even process what he was saying, because as soon as he had startled me awake and I opened my eyes to his frantic screaming, I saw a teen girl or small woman with a foggy hue surrounding her, sitting at the end of our bed directly at his feet. As soon as I managed to divert my gaze from her to assist him and listen to his cries, I glanced back and saw that she had disappeared completely. After getting up to change our sheets, he was covered in a small amount of vomit from the previous incident. He looked at me confused, saying, "I can't explain it. It felt like someone was sitting on my back, pinning me to the bed, but jamming their hand in my mouth. Like trying to go down my throat. People don't vomit in their sleep. What was that?" He truly thought it was me teasing him until he realized I was asleep and couldn't have been on his back. I eventually told him about the woman who looked like she was a dream but in reality, explaining she was like a black and white movie but in our world of color, in our reality. I slept in the living room after that. Until we moved shortly after. We heard things all the time, someone walking up and down the stairs, doors opening and closing, and all the normal paranormal stuff you hear people say but never really believe. Until that night, it was never violent or terrifying. And after that night we learned no room was safe anymore. We had mysterious random electrical fires, and you could literally feel the heaviness in the air walking in from outside. And if we stayed home for too long, that energy made you feel like you were depressed, angry, and fatigued. It's like it drained all of you but gave you all of it or something. After moving, we learned a boy had painted dark symbols on the walls and practiced dark ideals until he ended himself, in that exact room of the house. And my parents were never notified because the young teen was taken to the ER where he later died and he wasn't pronounced dead at the home, so the realtor didn't break any law. I don't know if his satanic beliefs and his spray painting of the dark arts on the walls and floors caused all that to happen, but I know it did happen to us, and I'm no longer a skeptic. Haunting experiences from a skeptic. In all honesty, even though I readily believed in the paranormal when I was young, I am very much a skeptic now. There are things that happen, sometimes strange things, but I believe that just because I don't understand them, it doesn't automatically mean they are ghosts or aliens or gremlins. However, that being said, even though I can reason or explain away most of the unexplained events I've experienced, there are some that I just can't explain in any other way than paranormal activity. Below are the biggest strange occurrences I've experienced. Some I can find an explanation for, others I can't. Throughout my life I've encountered a number of weird events that at the time I attributed to being haunted. 99% revolve around the house I grew up in. The earliest I remember all happened when I was fairly young, likely between ages 8 and 12. One was when I was home alone, watching a movie in one room, and the stereo system in the other room turned on, blaring music loudly. This happened while I was watching the movie Gremlins. I was so terrified, I thought real gremlins must have caused that to happen and couldn't rewatch that movie for a very long time. The remote for that stereo was still on top of the system in the other room, so it's not like I accidentally sat on it. Maybe some weird power surge, or something, I honestly have no idea. That was the only time it happened. Another time I thought I heard a woman call my name. I thought it was my mom. Nobody called for me. I also thought I heard a man's voice come from the basement when there was no one else around, and I hid until my family came home. It wasn't even that old of a house, built maybe a decade or two before I was born. It was a pretty decent size with a full basement, half of which was finished, with a wall and door dividing the finished and unfinished sides. The finished side became a bedroom for my brother when he was in high school. After he moved out, it became mine when I was 12 or 13 until I moved out at 18. I thought it was awesome. I mean, what kid wouldn't want a space the size of a small apartment all to themselves, 2 floors away from their parents? But then weird things began to happen. Nothing too crazy at first, just the odd noise here and there, things that could be attributed to a house settling or critters making it into the paneled ceiling. Then it intensified. I was having a dream about a rattlesnake, and it was rattling its tail. I jumped awake but still heard the rattling until it slowly stopped after a few seconds, and it occurred to me that I might have just heard the maracas in the basement, which caused me to dream about a rattlesnake. My parents had a number of things from their time living in Puerto Rico before I was born, including a few instruments, among them a pair of maracas. It almost sounded as if someone was shaking them rapidly, and then as soon as I was conscious, they slowed down gradually until it stopped. Given the layout and size of the room, I didn't have a clear line of sight on the maracas. There was a couch between me and the coffee table they sat under, and as far as I could tell the next morning, they were still in the same general area they had been before. At one point in time, when I was younger, I had a plastic toy machete. As I got older and away from toys, I lost track of it. However, I thought it'd be a good piece to have for an upcoming Halloween costume. I looked everywhere for it, I never could find it. Sometime after Halloween had passed, I woke up to a slapping noise from my closet, just a few loud slaps in rapid succession, like plastic on plastic. I can't remember how long it went on anymore, maybe 2 or 3 repetitions of 3 to 4 slaps each, but I know it stopped soon after I was awake, just like the maracas. The next day I investigated my closet and found, above my line of sight, sitting atop some faux wood cubbyholes I had sitting up there, the toy machete. I have no idea if what I heard was real. I was more weirded out that it led me to find this previously thought lost item in an unusual place where I never put anything. The most haunting and terrifying for me was sometime later. I was in high school, possibly a sophomore. I hadn't really told people my stories before this happened. I figured they wouldn't believe me. I wasn't even sure I believed me. This one still gives me the chills just thinking about it. I woke up one night to a noise. I thought maybe water was dripping on the concrete floor of the unfinished section or something like that, but then as I fully woke up, I noticed it was getting louder and louder at a fairly steady but not completely even pace. The more it went on, the more it sounded like bare feet walking on the unfinished side of our basement. I began to freak out because it was getting louder. It sounded like it was walking right up to the doorway between the 2 sides of the basement. There was a pause. I stared at the door across the room, just waiting for the slightest hint of movement. Nothing. The steps began to walk away from the door. This went on for a while, the steps going towards and away from the door time after time. My heart was pounding, just waiting for someone or something to come through that door. I was terrified. And I couldn't run anywhere. The stairs up began right in front of the door in question. In my head, I thought if I ran, then whatever was pacing over there would for sure come after me. I couldn't say for certain how long that went on that night. It felt like hours, but it was probably just minutes. From then on I slept with a light on in that corner of the room, and I never, ever walked by that door again when I was alone. I ran by it up/down the stairs. In addition to that, I had dreams. Nowadays I blow off the dreams as just being my subconscious manifesting the strange events, but who knows? At the time, I thought I was haunted. I would regularly have dreams where I was in that basement, and a figure of a woman, tall, long dark hair, face always in shadow so I couldn't make out her features clearly, long flowing dress, would stare at me. I would be frozen in place, and she'd come up to me, sometimes entering from the unfinished side of the basement, other times just appearing, and just stare. I had that dream many, many times, usually identical. Sometimes she touched me, which usually woke me up, sometimes she'd speak, couldn't remember what she said when I woke up, but usually just stared at me from a couple of feet away and right up in my face. I hated that dream. It was more like a nightmare. That dream continued with me after I moved out of that house. I actually think it got more intense, to the point where I was expecting it once a week for a while there. But it finally stopped by the time my parents sold that house years later. I tried to tell my parents about some of these noises I'd heard, but they blew me off, thinking I was trying to be funny. When I finally told my friends my experiences, one said he'd heard the maracas one time when he slept over on the couch down there. Similar to me, they stopped as soon as he woke up. Another said he thought he saw the rocking chair I had down there moving one night, and that it stopped as soon as he looked at it. Additionally, my brother and his wife moved back into the basement of that house for a brief time before my parents moved out. My sister-in-law and I exchanged basement ghost stories. She claims to have had dreams about a trio of ghosts haunting that basement, a man, woman, and child. She also claims to have heard strange noises and voices, seen weird shadows, etc. My brother has never mentioned anything from all the years he lived down there. As far as he's concerned, it's all in our heads. I still have the occasional strange occurrence, even to this day. Every so often I wake up to a woman shouting or whispering my first name, as recently as a couple of months ago when I woke up to a woman loudly whispering my name in my ear. I shot up. I thought it was my wife. Nobody was there. My wife was in her office working quietly. Possibly just a dream, I don't know. Believe me or not, these things happened, and I just felt like putting them out there. Aside from a few select friends and family members, I haven't opened up about them to anyone because I feel like it makes me sound like a crazy person. It was around 1997 when I first started working at a gun club in the US. We had a manager/bartender we all called Ma. A lovely, yet stern Sicilian, a woman we all considered our second mother. When Ma contracted cancer, she had a double mastectomy and then later contracted bone cancer. It was horrible, we couldn't even hug her because it hurt to be hugged. One day, we were at the bar, and she had accepted the idea a second cancer bout would be hard to outlive. I could tell she decided this because other people close to her told us to support her in every way possible. One day we were sitting at the bar, she came out of left field and said, "If I could come back here, I would." I said wide-eyed, "Don't haunt." She interrupted my words with, "Don't worry, I'll only turn on the water in the bathroom or something. And I want to get back at my ex-husband for the things he did." She finally passed after some time, very sad for me and others. Her mom outlived her. So some time passed, and I became manager because there were no other volunteers to cover such a task. The gun club thrived on volunteers and voluntary donations from life members. I would open the clubhouse, a very old building with fire-safe doors. The doors were loud when opened, nobody could sneak up on me in there. The woman's bathroom was immaculate due to the fact that gun clubs usually only have women once in a great while. On 3 occasions before we opened for business, the water in the women's bathroom, after her passing, was on full blast in the sink, water splashing everywhere. I had replaced the seal, O-rings, recently due to dripping, so it was not a mechanical thing. I finally said, "Okay, stop." To my regret. I didn't realize I couldn't embrace the idea completely way back then. It would be different now. A few more days passed, and her mom, who was active as a volunteer there, brought Ma's ex-husband to the clubhouse one day. Not sure if it was to pay homage or regrets or what. He was walking around the clubhouse, admiring all the pictures framed on the walls. Walking with his hands behind his back in some type of stoic attempt to participate. Well, we had vaulted ceilings in the main room of the club. The ceiling tiles made of cardboard with holes drilled in them from like 1968 were glued to the ceiling and would periodically fall due to degraded glue. Maybe one tile every 6 months to a year would fall and need to be glued again, job security. The ex-husband was wondering about when a tile decided to break loose and hit him directly in the head, not hurting him, but more so startling him. I was like, mission complete, and everything went quiet after that. The events. The most important event for me occurred between 2011 and 2013. The following happened about 15 years ago at a ranch-style house in the middle of the country, surrounded by farmland and sparsely spaced houses. I haven't talked to my dad in years, am a very headstrong skeptic, and am an atheist. But I have become spiritual in my late 20s and 30s. I believe in the universe and energy, if that makes sense. It was between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. at night, and my dad and I were home. He was in his office room with the radio very loud, and I was in the living room working on community college homework. My dad can't hear very well due to a lifetime of severe hearing damage from farming, hunting, trucking, loud music, loud vehicles, and manual labor work while mostly not using hearing protection. He wears 2 good quality hearing aids and still cannot hear well, and I highly doubt he was wearing them at this time. Especially since his office radio was cranked up loud. We both heard the kitchen door open with a pop, a squeaking kind of sound, which was the typical sound when opened. Work boots walking heavy on the kitchen floor. We all wore work boots because we were outside laborers and walked heavy, and the sound of both the work boots being taken off and being dropped on the kitchen floor, which is what we, my dad, little brother, and I, did, and a very common noise. My dad and I both heard it and figured it was my little brother coming home. However, the outside free roaming dogs hadn't barked, and the driveway alarms didn't go off. Maybe the dogs were out roaming or maybe the driveway alarms didn't pick up the car. How we tried to rationalize it. I called my little brother, and he was 45 minutes away. I told my dad to grab his pistol because there was either someone or something in the house with us, so he did, and we searched the entire house room by room. Upstairs, ground floor, first and then downstairs, and then looked outside. It was just us. I said that we should search the outside too, and my dad said, "Nobody is here," implying no other physical persons, and why would an uninvited stranger take off their boots? To which I agreed that made sense, but we both were 100% certain we heard something. It should be noted that my dad is a very immature person, likely a narcissist, and doesn't like to admit he is wrong or flawed. And even he said something along the lines of, "Damn, insert coins to begin, I can't believe I heard that." You can be standing right next to the man on the quietest day possible, and if he is not actually paying attention to you, he won't hear you. If I had just experienced that experience myself, I would probably have dismissed it or doubted myself, but since his hearing literally is that horrible and he heard it too, there's no way I can or will. Not to mention, his office room is on the opposite side of the house from the kitchen. My little brother's experiences. In that house my little brother experienced seeing shadow people for years, multiple ones at times too, constantly hearing boots walk in the kitchen and connecting dining room at or around 3 in the morning. Having something heavy but unseen crawl on and be in his car after visiting what he calls the demon house in the closest town with a friend whose family was renovating the house to rent out. The friend was in the car while something crawled on it. Having the same friend tell him that it feels like you're being watched while in the basement of my dad's house and mentioning the basement hallway, Hearing children in our home laugh as well as telling him help me / us, being upstairs and hearing my mom call his name from the basement while she wasn't home, constantly seeing the Hat Man, and many, many more stories. My eyes watered, and I got goosebumps typing this all these years later. He could literally write a Harry Potter-sized novel on everything he experienced because it was that frequent and over that long of a period. There was a time in my teenage years, about 15 years ago, probably between 2007 and 2010, when I swear I heard something breathe heavily directly in my left ear. However, over time, as I told others about it, I began to doubt myself and thought maybe I heard my own breathing. Nowadays I'm unsure of the validity of that event, but when it happened, it scared me enough to where I jumped/fell out of the chair I was sitting in. The following occurred likely between 1999 and 2002. Another event is that my older sister said she saw what she thought was my little brother, when he was just a toddler and she a young child, but it turns out it was a toddler-like light-like figure. Sometime during the middle of the night when she got up to use the bathroom, she thought she saw my little brother in the hallway by the bathroom. She walked up very close to it because it had its back to her, and she called out my little brother's name to it. It wasn't my little brother. She locked herself in the bathroom, fell asleep in the bathroom, and wouldn't come out until someone woke up, knocked on the door, and vocalized who they were. This was 25 plus years ago, and eventually, as she got older, she wouldn't talk about it anymore. But for the longest time, when asked about the story, she said the same thing. Typing this made my eyes water too. The most recent event I know of, probably between 2017 and 2019, is that my dad and an ex of his were in the basement. They were standing near the hallway in the basement and had a ping pong ball tossed at them from the basement hallway. For descriptive purposes, the basement was mostly still how it was when it was built in the 70s, the right side of it being a big open area, a bar, and a bedroom. The left side is a hallway with 3 rooms, 2 on the left side and 1 big one on the right. In the big room on the right of the hallway, there's a ping pong table. That hallway does not have a light, each room only has a singular light. That hallway is pitch black, the entire basement is very dark as the basement walls had very dark brown wood panels and inadequate lighting, and the hallway is just tall and wide enough to walk through. It would be impossible for the ball to roll at them from the height that it was projected at them, and it would have to come from the center of the room on the right, around a 90 degrees turn, through and around a doorway, and down the hallway. At least 15 to 25 feet. September 29, 2024. A friend who is a direct neighbor brought over some homemade apple cider and soup. After she left, I heard a disembodied voice say something I couldn't make out. My dog reacted to it too. I tried to get it to speak again, but it didn't. I told her what happened, and she said she had an event a week or 2 prior where a candle warmer with an adjustable knob she had turned on had turned itself off. She also said she has thought she has had a presence in her apartment for some time. If someone else told me these events, I probably wouldn't believe them, so I understand if you don't, but these are true stories. I live on the border of Colorado and Wyoming, in the middle of bumduck nowhere on a 10-acre ranch. Now our house is on a trailer, but it's on cinder blocks if that makes sense. The road by our house used to be a part of the Pony Express. We believe our ranch is on an Indian burial ground, and to make things better, a really popular bison ranch not too far from us called the Terry Bison Ranch has found teepee rings on their property. Our neighbors, from whom we get hay, said part of their house used to be a part of an old railway station and railway line before the Golden Spike, and the railroad is no longer there anymore, so long story short, our land and the land around us have a lot of history. On to the paranormal stuff. My mother owns some stuff that was my great-grandmother's, and she is dead. This first instance is one my stepdad had long ago that started this journey. My stepdad, who is basically my best friend, has diabetes, and he has trouble sleeping. So in the middle of the night he goes out, grabs a snack, sits down at the table, eats it, and goes back to bed. Well, one night he got up, and he saw an old lady walk from our kitchen to our laundry room. The next morning he told all of us about it, and my stepdad is a jokester that likes to get you all worked up, so nobody believed him. Well, that night was the start of things that occurred on our ranch that we cannot explain, and we 100% believe it is something paranormal because all of us have had our experiences. Now my family wasn't new to the paranormal. We stayed at the old Western Hotel down near Durango, and we heard kids laughing in the hallway in the dead of night, and we opened the door to find that nobody was there. We were the only kids in the hotel. Now I was a baby, so technically the story I'm about to tell you is my first paranormal experience. My first experience happened outside. See, my stepbrothers like to come over every once in a while, and when they do, we like to play a game called hide and seek in the dark. The game is simple. I, my 2 stepbrothers, and my sister go outside in pitch black and play hide and seek. We all get a flashlight, and you can go anywhere on the ranch, and if you're tagged, you're it for the next round. Well, since I was the youngest, I went first. See, my older stepbrother is prone to hiding in the strangest of places. One time he hid in the dumpster. Well, I was walking over towards our barn, and there is an overhang next to a door that leads inside. I saw a black shadow standing there, and I immediately assumed it was my stepbrother. Before I get farther, let's assign everyone fake names so we don't get mixed up. Mom. Stepdad, Zachary. Stepbrother oldest, Tyrese. Younger stepbrother, he is still older than me, just younger than his brother, Timberlake. Older sister, Tristia. Younger sister is still older than me, Amanda. Okay, now everyone has names. Well, I assume this black shadow is Tyrese, so I turn off my flashlight so he doesn't see me. When I begin to approach, the shadow starts to move. You see, if you follow the barn, there is a wooden fence that connects the barn and the chicken coop. So when I approach this shadow, it begins to go down that way towards the chicken coop. So I followed it, and my plan was when it turned the corner, I was going to jump out and get him. So the shadow turns the corner, and I turn the corner, and nobody was there. I was looking everywhere, under the trailer, inside the chicken coop, around the chicken coop, everywhere, and there was no one. Strange, so I think I just must have lost Tyrese. Skip to the part where I find Tyrese, Timberlake, and Amanda. They were on the other side of the ranch altogether. So when I caught them, I asked, who was over by the overhang at the barn? They all start laughing. What's so funny? Timberlake says, what are you ducking blind? We were over here the whole game. Mind you, they were on the complete other side of the property. My stomach dropped. I didn't tell them what I saw because I couldn't believe it. A few weeks later, my Tyrese and Timberlake leave. A few nights after they left, I, Zachary, and Tristia are eating dinner. Zachary says, what's that over by the barn? We all proceed to stare out the back glass door. We all looked out there, and there was an apparition of a man clear as day that ran into one of the stables with our Jersey cow. Now, where this stable was right next to the overhang where I saw the shadow. Zachary grabs our double-barrel 12-gauge and heads out to the stable. He looks from the outside of the panels and doesn't see anybody, so he climbs inside the stable and looks around, and nobody is there. He comes inside, and the first thing that he said when he walked inside was, y'all thought I was ducking crazy when I said I saw an old lady in here? Well, now you are all crazy too because I know you saw that man over by those stables. I and Tristia looked at each other, and I said, holy shit, you're not crazy. I saw that, and Tristia saw that. What the duck is going on? Remember how I said my stepdad Zachary was like my best friend? Well, the night I saw the shadow, I told him what I saw. So we started connecting the dots after this incident. We saw that shadow again by the stable a month later. We believe the spirits at our house are friendly, and we think some of the spirits are Native American spirits because we think our house is on an Indian burial ground because we have found arrowheads on our property. Zachary is a heavy machinery mechanic, and on his way home from work, they had found a confirmed Indian burial ground next to the highway. Well, he stole an arrowhead from the place they had dug up the burial ground, so that doesn't help our case. Now this is where shit starts to get crazy. Tristia is home alone outside and hears inside the house what she describes as sledgehammers pounding on the cabinet doors. The volume was indescribable, she claims. At this point we had made the paranormal thing a joke, like, if something fell, we said, that damn Indian knocking everything down. We had kind of just accepted the fact that our house was haunted. Well, Tyrese and Timberlake had come back over again for a few weeks. One night I'm in my room playing with my model trains when my door opens, not by a lot, but opens and then shuts. Now I saw feet at the bottom of my door when this happened, so I thought that Tyrese had peeked his head in to come in and check in on me. I opened my door and said, Tyrese, what do you need, or did you need something? Tyrese is at the sink in the kitchen with Zachary washing dishes. Huh? Do you need something? What are you talking about, Op? I saw you come to my door. What do you need? I have been here the whole time, what are you talking about? I can tell when Tyrese is joking or not, and he was dead serious. I explained to them what happened, and they both said that they were there the whole time, and Timberlake was outside with Tristia. My mother was in her bedroom across the house. I thought that was super weird. Now this is where shit got super real. The next night Tyrese is hungry and grabs a snack. He sits down at the table, looks up, and across from him at the table was an old lady. It startled him, and he jumped out of his chair. The next morning he told us all about the incident, and Zachary proceeded to say, I told you I am not ducking crazy. Skip to a few days later, and Tyrese is with my mom, and they are looking through a photo album. Something catches Tyrese's eye, and he tells my mom to stop and not flip the page. He then proceeds to point at a woman who he has never met or seen in his life, and he didn't even know her name, and he said, "That's the lady I saw at the table sitting across from me." The lady who he had just pointed to was my deceased great-grandmother. Zachary claims that was the woman who he saw walking from the kitchen to the laundry room. A few months later, I'm in the kitchen, home alone with Amanda, and I was washing dishes. I am washing the dishes, and I feel a tap on my shoulder. I full on felt a hand on my shoulder. I swung around, and Amanda was across the kitchen. I asked her, "Did you just touch me?" "No." "Well, somebody did." "Okay, sure." She didn't believe me. Now for the past year, everything seemed to have calmed down, until just about 3 months ago. Zachary said that his cabinet door was always open. He would shut it, get in the shower, get out, and it would be open again. One of our dogs, if he went into the bathroom with that cabinet, would always be looking up at the ceiling. Well, I was home alone all by myself one day, and I experienced the same thing Zachary did. I was cleaning, and his cabinet door was open. I closed it, came back into the bathroom, and the cabinet door was open again. And it can't just swing open. If you were to open it just a tiny bit, it would close because of the hinges. It has to be open all the way to stay open. This happened just about a month ago. I was sitting on the couch with my dog, and she is a blue heeler, and when she looks at something, you can tell when she is. I was sitting on the couch with her, and she suddenly looked into the hallway that leads into my room. Keep in mind I always shut my door, that way our dogs don't get in my room and chew everything up. Well, she gets up off the couch, still looking into the hallway while walking towards it, and then stops. Still having her ears perked up, she continues walking again and turns and looks into my room. My door was wide open. And the light was off, and you couldn't see a thing. Well, I was behind her, and she was staring into my room with her ears perked still, and then she cocked her head and began barking violently at nothing. That gave me chills. Finally, the last incident that has happened recently. Zachary had gotten up for his midnight snack. I was up, so I had a snack with him, and we talked for a bit when all of a sudden, we heard footsteps at the front door, and they went into Zachary's and my mom's bedroom. Then we didn't hear them anymore until we heard a growl come from their room. We both exchanged words about what we had just heard and agreed that we had just heard correctly and had heard the same thing. My mother also claims that she has heard something fidgeting with the front door.